Meeting back to order. This is a resumption of meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, which started April 13th, 2021. Today's date is May 11th, 2021. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and therefore members are attending in person in the room. And no one is attending remotely, or everyone is attending remotely at this time. No one is attending in the room, but members are free to do so. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. And I'd like to just remind everyone not to take screenshots or take photos of your screen. And also just to unmute yourself when you have a point of order or wish to speak, and remember to put yourself on mute when you're not. I have a speakers list from the last meeting, and we are still on Mr. Turnbull's amendment, but I did want to mention at the onset a few things, just like I've mentioned before. The main estimates are going to be due at the end of this month to be returned to the House, and we do need to give fair warning to the officials, and if we do want to have a meeting of the officials here. So ideally, I'd like to know today if you'd like me to schedule a meeting for the main estimates, then I need to get going on that. We did hear from the speaker on the question of privilege that was before the House, and the speaker did rule that he didn't find it to be a prima facie question of privilege, so we won't have that coming to our committee. But we do have C19 in the House that will get voted on later today. That is my understanding, and so that will be referred to this committee. So I just want everyone to be aware of the different expectations that are on our committee right now. And so those are the few things that I have on my radar at this point. And like always, I will let you know that we've got various different motions that are on notice as well. So does anybody have anything they'd like to say on these issues as to the main estimates or C19 at this point before we begin back on Mr. Turnbull's motion? Ms. Vecchio?
Yeah, thank you very much. Perhaps because we do know that Bill C19 is going to be voted on today after question period, I believe. If we could just find out the order of precedence, if the clerk could maybe share with us, because I do know that many of the members, even members of my team, what is the precedence? What is the things? How do they need to go to an order? We've been going on a filibuster, of course, since February 23rd. Does that stall it out? How does this go? So I'm kind of looking for some procedural guidance, and I would like to be able to have a follow-up question if there's a question for that from the clerk.
Sure. Mr. Clerk, I guess you can help us there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, hello, Ms. Vecchio. So the usual, I guess, practice that occurs when a bill is referred to a committee, the committee tends to give precedence to legislation that is referred to it from the House. That's not a hard and fast rule. It is still ultimately a decision for the committee to make in terms of how it wishes to order its work. However, you probably can call it a convention that committees do tend to give precedence to legislation that does come forward. But as I said, it's up to the committee to make the ultimate decision how it wants to prioritize its work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. That's wonderful.
Sorry, thank you, Jeanette. Anything else on the order of different events? No. Anything regarding the main estimates? Is it going to be the decision of this committee to not deal with the main estimates then? Should I consider that to be the choice that the members wish to make? Or I should bring it up again in the next meeting? Or what would you like? Mr. Turnbull, you raised your hand.
I just wanted a point of clarification on that. Isn't it part of the parliamentary sort of standing committee's duties to do that work on main estimates? Generally speaking.
Generally speaking, every committee I've sat on and PROC has always returned the main estimates. This would be a first for me, but I mean, I haven't been around forever, and so we'll have the clerk answer back to that.
So, Mr. Turnbull, the House does refer estimates periodically to committees for that exact purpose, to allow the committee to look at the estimates, to hear from relevant witnesses on those estimates, such as, for example, a minister, or in our case, for the House of Commons, the Speaker or the Clerk of the House. However, again, it is up to the committee to make the determination if they want to take up those estimates. Should the committee not take up the estimates, perhaps because they made a decision not to, or because they haven't had the time to do it and other matters have gotten in the way, those estimates are always automatically reported back by a specified date. In this case, for the main estimates that were referred to PROC, that date is May 31st. So if the committee doesn't choose to take the estimates up by that date, they will automatically be referred back to the House, and they will no longer be available, so to speak, for the committee to look at. However, there's a bit of a caveat to that. Committees in the past, sometimes not having been able to meet the report back deadline, have chosen to do a subject matter study of the main estimates. And it is just like when they refer to any main estimates, with the limitation that they cannot make any suggestions on changing the actual totals, the dollar totals that are in those main estimates, but they can still choose to invite witnesses. They can proceed with questions to witnesses on the same basis as they would as if the estimates were still fully before them. They just can't make any recommendations to reduce the amount of dollars that are associated with each of the votes in those estimates.
Okay. So essentially, they wouldn't be able to change at that point the estimates, just make recommendations from their study?
Madam Chair, even at that point, they wouldn't be making any type of recommendations. It would merely provide an opportunity to the committee to hold a meeting with witnesses to discuss what had been in the main estimates.
Okay. Okay. All right. Hard for me to distinguish. Anybody else on this issue? Okay, I don't see that. Oh, Mr. Terrien.
Madame la Présidente, juste une question comme ça. On a déjà...
Madam Chair, we've already done this. Last year, I think, we did the same. Am I wrong? Monsieur Terrien? In the fall, the committee had supplementary estimates referred to, and the committee had meetings with the minister and the Speaker of the House, the Security Parliamentary Secretary. But it had not changed anything to the main estimates, and it hadn't considered it. That's what I thought.
All right. Thank you for the clarifications, Mr. Clerk. We will move on to...
Sorry, Ruby. I was just thinking, I don't know, I was going back and forth. Is there any way that this might not be normal, but because we know that there's other things to do, is there... Never mind. I don't think we can, because I was going to say, should we try to schedule some extra time? Because we do know that these things have to get done. So schedule extra time. But of course, we don't know if we'll need extra time because the conversation or discussion or the filibuster just may continue to go on. So that's just my only concern. If we did want to schedule more time, we don't know if that time will be used effectively or not. So never mind. I just had this great idea, I thought, for a moment. So sorry.
Well, I will let you know that even within our regularly scheduled times at this point, if we were to make the decision, we do have the time. Essentially, if I was given direction, I could book a meeting for witnesses to appear on the main estimates. We have a constituency week next week, but we would still have enough time. But that's why I brought it up today. So anyways, you can let me know later on if
Madam Chair, it's
if your idea changes.
it's Justin again. I can also just let the committee know, I have been in touch in a general way with the various entities that have main estimates before PROC, letting them know that there is a possibility that a very short notice invitation could potentially be proffered to them. So they are, in fact, getting prepared in case there is an invitation from PROC, and they should be able to appear on relatively short notice. But obviously, I mean, it is still within the hands of the committee to make some sort of determination as to whether they want to go forward with that. And then if they do, look at possible scheduling dates when that kind of meeting can occur, or those meetings could occur.
Okay. That's all I have for general information and announcements. I guess we'll move back on to what we are on, the issue that we're on for committee business for the day, and that is, or for the time being, that's Mr. Turnbull's amendment. We do have a speakers list. A few people have fallen off that speakers list, but next in line I have Ms. Vecchio. Actually, I have Ms. Vecchio on the toolbar too, but I had you next in line on the speakers list from last meeting as well.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'm not going to take up very much time this morning. I know that it's really important that we have lots of things coming to us. Bill C-19, of course, although we did do the, I'm going to speak a little bit about the mandate, but I think it's really important that we look to see how can we figure out where we're going in these next few steps. I know that right now there will want to be C-19. We do want to look at that here in this committee. It's very, very important that we look at this bill. But we do have a hurdle, and we need to get over that hurdle today, and that is on the amendment brought forward by Ryan Turnbull. I'm just bringing this forward because let's not kid ourselves. Let's call it what it is. It's been a filibuster, and it's been a filibuster since February 23rd. So let's just get over that and say, how can we get to a decision on where we want to go? I'm just going to put it right out there, and I think we've always said so. Speaking to all opposition parties, we know with their prorogation study, we are focusing on hearing from the Prime Minister, who ultimately would have had the opportunity, or who ultimately is the person who had called the prorogation. At that time, we also, in our initial motion, looked at, of course, the Chief of Staff, Katie Telford. I'm unsure if anyone will want her to go to any committees right now. Just honestly, I know that it's a hot thing, so that would be a very hot topic to invite her to this. So I don't want to necessarily go there, but the Prime Minister ultimately is who we want to go to. There's lots of different asks here. There's been discussions about trying to bring in the We Charity. Well, perhaps we can negotiate, and that's what I'm saying. I am letting you know that if you're looking at the entire motion, whether it's the original motion or the amended motion, that ultimately there is one person that everybody wants to see, and that is why we'd be voting against Mr. Turnbull's motion, because it does not include the Prime Minister or even representation from the PMO, including documents. So that's why on this motion, I would not be able to support that, truly just on the fact that the one key person that everybody wants to see on this prorogation is the Prime Minister, and his name does not appear on that amendment. Therefore, I cannot support it. When we look at the original amendment, we can also recognize that there is some people that go from my original motion into this amended motion and find there. But let's just, I'm not saying let's drop it all, but I'm saying when the only thing we want is the Prime Minister to come to this, and we're asking, originally it was asking for 3 hours. I've heard Mr. Blakey, and perhaps Mr. Blakey will join in this conversation to talk about some of those discussions. I've heard Mr. Blakey say, listen, I want him for an hour. I don't know if that's a perfect quote, but that's a Daniel Blakey quote for you. Daniel would like to see him as well. I've heard the same thing from Alain Thériault. I don't know if he'll want me to do it in French today, but I will make sure I do it in time for him. But that is ultimately what we want to see, is the Prime Minister. So I don't hear I don't know if you've heard any of us talk about the Kilburgers in the last 2.5, 3 months. There hasn't been much discussion coming from this side. So let's call it what it is. We want the Prime Minister at this committee. This amendment does not include the Prime Minister. The original motion does include the Prime Minister. So hopefully we can get through, and knowing that when all opposition parties are asking for one thing, and one thing clearly being the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, to come here to committee to explain to us about the prorogation and his decisions. We have not set on a time frame. I'm looking at my guys. I'm looking at John, Peter, and Tom. I'm looking at you guys saying, sorry, I'm really going out there, but we just want the Prime Minister. That's what we want. Daniel's offered 1 hour. We've said 3. Let's get down to real negotiations. Let's get done this filibuster and say, at the end of the day, this is what we want. We're not asking for. We're not asking to see what the budget. We're not asking to talk about necessarily what the speech from the throne said, because I know a lot of times people are referencing that. We are asking for that date. If we can go back to August of 2020, what were the thoughts? What were the decisions that led up to this? You can indicate it was the throne speech, great, and perhaps we can just hear the Prime Minister say that. That would be wonderful as well. Let's be honest. Do I think we're going to get answers from the Prime Minister? Probably not. We don't see that in question period. We don't see that anywhere. So let's just call it what it is. But let us at least ask these questions. And I think that's the one thing, is we are being told that we're not be allowed to ask these questions to the Prime Minister of Canada. Yes, he is the Prime Minister, but he is also a member of Parliament who chose to prorogue Parliament of Canada during the biggest pandemic that our generation has ever seen. And yes, of course, it was at a very, very difficult time. But perhaps rather than having every Liberal member of Parliament.
Thank you, Ms. Vecchio. We've got Ms. Pettipas-Taylor next.
So, Madam Chair, since we're talking about negotiations and whatnot, before that I've got some comments and some prepared remarks prepared today. I'm just wondering, if we're talking about wanting to get some questions answered from the Prime Minister, would there be an option of perhaps submitting a list of questions to the Prime Minister and having them respond to them in writing? Would that be sufficient for the opposition parties? I'm putting that out there in good faith and wanting to negotiate and to see, is there a way that we can reach some type of a consensus here?
I guess that's a question for you, Ms. Vecchio. Is that something you'd like to interject with? Monsieur Terrien also has his hand up on that.
Well, I think I'll be honest. Golly gee, that sure does. That sounds. It's lovely and it's a really nice suggestion, but I do not think it will get to our ultimate goal. And I would prefer to pass that over to my other opposition members, including Mr. Terrien, Mr. Blakey, and members of the Conservative Caucus as well. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak to that, Monsieur Terrien? Go ahead. Go.
J'ai pas pris la parole encore.
I haven't spoken to this yet. Look, there are findings. Prorogation is something that merits study, and that's what had been proposed. The government leader, I am leader for the bloc. So I know what's happening in terms of the bloc when we're in Parliament. This is the second is supposed to say, look, I know what happened. We prorogued for this and that reason. But when that person came to the committee, nothing was said. He just, get back to the idea that he didn't know, that he had no idea why there was any prorogation. So, he kind of was saying, gee, I'm not the one who made the decision. Well, look, when I heard Mr. Rodriguez, I thought to myself, there's only one person who can answer our questions and who can enlighten us on the subject of prorogation. That's clear. Mr. Rodriguez didn't even know, from what he told us, that the minister had resigned and one date, and then on the 18th there was a prorogation. So that's very far from trying to understand a political phenomenon and what happened, and that's something important. Parliament was shut down. So what I'm saying is that unless the Prime Minister is present, I don't see how we will be able to obtain enough information to be able to grasp the reasons behind the prorogation. And that's why I support Madame Vecchio's approach since the beginning. I don't see anyone other than Mr. Trudeau who, in person, who would come to talk to us and explain to us, because the leader demonstrated through non-answers that the decision came from the PM. That's my opinion. Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Terrien put it quite well in terms of the nature of some of the responses that were offered by the government House leader. Essentially, highlighted the fact that the Prime Minister is the main decision maker. Anyway, I won't try and kind of quote him because I don't have those quotes in front of me, but he did say things at various times in his testimony that kind of suggested that it really was the Prime Minister at the end of the day who made those calls, and nobody knows the mind of the Prime Minister but the Prime Minister. And so I think that's why it's important to have him here. I think one of the important functions of Parliament is to be able to question people, whether it's in question period or whether it's a committee. It's a very different kind of questioning that takes place. That's why it was not acceptable that Stephen Harper wouldn't meet with the press gallery, because you get different kinds of answers and different kinds of interactions when you have live questioning as opposed to written responses. It's why it's why order paper questions are not an adequate substitute for question period. And it's why, writing the Prime Minister a letter, I don't think is a substitute really for having him here at committee. So I do think it's important that the committee establish, and this is not news to the committee, but I think it's important that the committee establish the right precedent for this kind of study. If this is indeed a mechanism that's going to persist in our parliamentary culture, I think it's, and if it's the best we can do in terms of trying to mitigate against political abuses of prorogation, I think it's important that we get the mechanism right. So I would like to see the Prime Minister here at committee. What I do think is clear from Ms. Vecchio's comments, that I think put it quite well this morning or this afternoon, I guess, depending on where you're at in the country, is that the amendment itself that Mr. Turnbull has proposed is not doing the work of a compromise that's allowing the committee to move forward. And I think that's been made clear by the length of the proceedings since its introduction. What I am hearing is maybe a little bit of movement or willingness to have a conversation. Whatever that conversation is going to issue in will likely be a compromise that does not look like Mr. Turnbull's amendment. So what I would propose is that we have a vote on Mr. Turnbull's amendment, which does not close the debate on the motion overall. What it would do is clear the floor and make it possible for somebody else at some future point, perhaps hopefully after some productive conversation, to propose another amendment that might serve the purpose that Mr. Turnbull had in mind when he presented his originally. So that would allow us to at least have one vote, dispense with one item, and as I say, open the floor to other ideas that might come out of what I think is maybe the most productive conversation we've had at this committee in several months. So that would be my proposal. Maybe we could have a vote on the amendment, clear that, and then allow for this seemingly more productive conversation to take place, and then it just means that we could try and move to a solution that much more quickly if one emerges out of that conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Anybody else who wishes to speak to the oral testimony versus the written testimony, and then we can move back to the amendment and whether there's a vote on it. Ms. Pettipas-Taylor.
Thank you so much, Ruby. I'm wondering if perhaps Karen and Mr. Blakey would be prepared to maybe put on paper what it is that they're proposing. And then from there, we could perhaps work with that. And then from there, see what, if anything, we could come up with respect to possible movement. I don't know if that would be an option that both Daniel and Karen would be prepared to do, or Mr. Blakey and Mrs. Vecchio to be official here. But just wondering if we could have kind of a proposal on paper, and then from there we would be able to look at that, and then from there perhaps continue this conversation.
Okay, a proposal meaning a sub-amendment or an alternative amendment, and then you can decide whether you'd like to have a vote or, okay. Go ahead, Ms. Vecchio.
Although I, to be honest, thank you very much, Jeanette. I really appreciate that. I know that being the mover of the original motion, that's something I cannot do because it can't be but I think right now the bottom line is we're coming up with a counter proposal. I would personally like us to see get off this amendment, because what we're doing is we're talking about this amendment and missing the whole idea of this prorogation, because we're talking about other things. So let's get back to what our function is, what the mandate of the report's supposed to be, and get off this amendment and get back to the original and make alterations. I know Daniel, and I'm looking at some of our own team of how can we do this? We want to get this work done. So thanks very much. And thank you, Jeanette. I really do appreciate your openness, and Daniel and everybody else. I'm looking at Kirsty moving her head going, okay, where are we going with this? I do really appreciate everybody having a true conversation today. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Petty-Pat-Taylor, the floor is back to you. I was just thinking that it's good to have the conversation back and forth, but the floor is yours really at this point. Oh, Mr. Blakey has something to say. Did you want to?
If I might, yeah, just on process. I wonder if we could agree on this much, Madam Chair. If it seems like we're not going to develop a solution today on the floor, which is fine. It's hard. It's sometimes hard to do. Perhaps what we could do is agree that at the end of this meeting, we'll have a vote on the amendment so that the floor is clear for the beginning of the next meeting. We'll still be on the motion, so nothing will have been decided ultimately. But we can dispense with the amendment one way or the other at the end of this meeting. That would allow the parties some time to speak in the lead up to Thursday's meeting, knowing that there's an open floor for amendments to this motion. If that comes out of those conversations, it may not. But it would allow us at least to do something novel for the first time in a few months by making a decision, and kind of clear the way, as it were, for something on Thursday. So that would allow members who I know have more to say on the amendment to do that today. But you know, we just heard some arguments in the House yesterday about the importance of debate, but also the importance of deciding things in respect of C-19. I think some of those arguments also apply here. So perhaps we could at least do that in respect of the amendment, and then see where we can get to in time for Thursday's meeting, and whether we can find a more you know, fulsomely productive way forward by the end of the week. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Vecchio, and then back to Ms. Petty-Pat-Taylor.
I fully appreciate this, the idea of where Daniel has gone with this, and perhaps we can do something like that. The only concern that I have, of course, is that these dates, we have not stayed within the committee time recently, because none of these have been suspended. So the thing is, if we come to bells like we have today, I fear that we would go directly to bells, suspend, and not get back to this issue. So there are some just concerns that we have, or that I personally have, because of the fact that we haven't seen a 2-hour committee meeting in months. So if there's some kind of time frame, because I just know that we've got bells today, we've got a variety of things that could then interrupt the great work and great idea that you have, Daniel. That's my only concern.
I'm afraid I don't really understand what you mean, Ms. Vecchio. We haven't seen a 2-hour committee meeting.
I'm referring to all of the meetings have been going far over time. So usually where we'd suspend at 1 o'clock,
right.
It's just that we've not been able to ever end on time. And that's by no means your fault, Ruby. It's just the fact that our committee work continues to go on during that time. And I do know that today there are other events on our schedules that would end up suspending this meeting due to our duties in the House.
Okay. Yes, there are votes at 3, right? With no bells, I think, leading up to that. So, okay, thank you, Ms. Vecchio. Thanks for that. Maybe this discussion will help lead us on a slightly different path today. Let's see. And Ms. Petty-Pat-Taylor, maybe you can respond to some of that. But the floor is yours, really, as it was at the beginning of the meeting on Mr. Turnbull's amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to understand, and maybe I've missed something here. With respect to the proposition of having something in writing, is that like a definite no, not on the table? I just wanted to understand that, because I think it would just help us as our group, as our caucus, or as my Liberal colleagues, just to kind of look and reflect at what exactly the proposal is. And then from there, we would be in a better position to respond. And I just want to get a sense, like, is that off the table, or is that still an option? So I'm sorry, Karen and Daniel, I may have missed that.
I think everything's on the table right now, and I think that's a great opportunity for us to start, having those conversations. I'll do whatever I can to help on those efforts.
Okay, great, Ms.
And
Vecchio. Go ahead, Mr. Blakey.
sorry, Madam Chair. And likewise, yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. There is no proposal that preceded today's meeting. So I think it'll just take a little time to kind of sit down and hammer out what that might look like. But I'm certainly happy to provide a proposal in whatever format is most useful. And in respect of today and in response to Ms. Vecchio's concerns, like I would be prepared to agree right now to have a vote on the amendment at 5-1 Eastern and end our meeting at the usual time so that the way is cleared for Thursday. I think we're, as I say, I mean, closer to a position to have some meaningfully productive conversations than we have been in a while. So unless my Liberal colleagues see a lot of virtue in extending the time of today's meeting, I'd be happy to have a vote on the amendment 5 minutes before our regular meeting time would end, and end the meeting on time, and then try and come back Thursday with some kind of game plan for how we move forward.
Okay, Ms. Petty.
May I? And again, I'm just, nothing is planned here. We're just really trying to negotiate, and I guess perhaps we're trying to work through things. Just a thought, would it be appropriate to suspend and allow the Conservatives and the NDP in the bloc to prepare in writing what they suggest? And then from there, we could see it before any further direction would be taken. Again, so then we would know what is being proposed, and then perhaps we would be more comfortable in moving forward from there.
Okay, Ms. Vecchio.
Fully appreciate that, Jeanette, and I understand that, but I think really we're now being asked for the solution. The solution all this time lays on the steps of the Liberal Party. We are happy to bring you forward some ideas, but I don't think that this should be a yay or nay. I don't think that should be a yay or nay on that. If you know what I'm saying, I think we all have to work together on this, but I don't think that there should be, I guess there should, here's a trust thing. If we don't vote, if we vote his down, we still know that there's an opportunity now for an amendment to be there. At this time, we don't have an opportunity to put an amendment there at all because Ryan's is taking that spot. This is right now, it's yes, I hear what you're saying. At the end of the day, it's either going to be we talk about Ryan's or we talk about my motion. That's how it kind of will roll out. But I think that at the end of the day, we know that we're going to be voting against Ryan's. We know that you will not be supporting ours and that this will continue as a filibuster. So I think as we continue to work back and forth on this, we know at the end of the day, there's something going to be coming from opposition parties, probably about the Prime Minister being the person that needs to come to this committee meeting. And ultimately, that is what the holdup is. So we will work on these types of things and ensure that we all know where we're going. But let's get that going. I don't know. I think there's got to be a lot of work done on the Liberal side as well. I don't know if suspension or actually just having this conversation right now where we're actually talking about it is more beneficial. I'm not sure. So I'll just pass it on. Thanks.
If I could, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Blakey.
Add to that, I think it might take a little bit of time for us to agree. As I say, I mean, nobody came to this meeting, I think, even anticipating that there might be the kind of degree of openness to new conversation that we're seeing. So I think it's going to take a little time to hammer something out. I'm loath to try and do that within the meeting time. I think after it's taken a very long time to get to here, it feels like a bit of an artificially urgent deadline. And I know that there are so many Liberals on the committee who have more to say on the amendment, who thought that they were going to have a lot more time than it turns out they may. And so I think it would be, I don't want to catch anyone off guard or, foreclose on an important opportunity to say what has not yet been said. So I think giving it the rest of this meeting, having the vote on the amendment, and then being able to come back on Thursday is the best way to proceed.
Okay. All right. Mr. Turnbull, on this issue? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and follow up to Ms. Vecchio's comments and Mr. Blakey's comments, I think really we have tried to put forward what we thought was a reasonable compromise, and I realize that you don't necessarily see it that way or share that perspective, and I understand that. But I really think the impetus is now on the opposition parties to say, well, what is a counter proposal? You obviously can put forward a sub amendment, or and as Ms. Petitpas Taylor I think rightly said, is what do you want to see the outcome of this to be? And it sounds like there's been several opportunities here to compromise, even on having written submissions with the Prime Minister, and to get answers to the burning questions that you have, and that's fine. But doesn't sound like there's an interest in that potential solution. So I'm just wondering, like, are we still really at an impasse, or is there really a genuine, concerted effort to kind of compromise here? Because that's not really what I'm hearing. I'm hearing quite a bit of talking about it, but how do we get past this? If you really want to get past it, then put forward a substantive amendment in writing that we can have some confidence in. I've put forward a substantive amendment in writing that we're now debating, and I have lots of reasons left to speak to that and the rationale for why I think that's reasonable. So, and I think some of my colleagues do as well. So in an effort to try to get past this sort of moment of sort of deadlock that we're kind of seem to be in, it would be great to have that in writing if possible. And I think whenever the opposition members are ready to put something forward, I think would be great.
Ms.
So I'm very open.
Time out. Am I understanding that after 2 months of filibustering, you're asking us to get you out of the filibuster because we need to come forward with an amendment? We put forward ours. Why don't you withdraw your amendment and we can start where we're at? I'll be honest, I felt the conversation was going very, very well until moments ago. We actually have been working on this, Ryan. We have all been working on this. Unfortunately, I know that for months you guys have known that you're not getting the support of this. You've known, the leader on this committee has known. So please don't put that false pretense out there. No one on this committee can say that the opposition members were going to vote for this amendment. And that is why this filibuster has continued now for 2 months. So let's not be disingenuous about this. The fact is, it is not up to anyone on the opposition. I am saying where there's important work to be done, and I'm looking at the people that I've been negotiating with in the last couple of minutes. The fact is, we all know that there's important work to get done, and we need to get there. So here's the idea. You're asking us, perhaps we could withdraw this and then maybe come up with something. Do not put this on our shoulders, because you've been speaking for 2 full months on this. Do not put this on our shoulders to provide you an amendment so that you guys can get out of this filibuster. Withdraw your amendment and let's put forward a proper amendment. Or let's do what Daniel had said earlier, but please do not think that for the last 2 months, opposition parties have not tried to negotiate multiple times. We have not taken the floor for more than probably an hour in the last 2 months, unless you're talking about the number of times you've had to call relevance or repetition, I would say. But let's be honest here. If we want to get something, if you want to withdraw this motion, then show us that you guys really want to negotiate. Don't put it on us. Show us, Orion, that you guys actually want to negotiate. Then, if you're questioning the fact that this is where we're at, take this motion down then, like seriously, and let's do real business, because we've wasted our time on this motion.
Back, Ms. Duncan, Dr. Duncan, and then Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And friends, I'd just like to begin by thanking Ms. Petitpas Taylor, Jeanette, for coming forward with this and starting a good conversation. And I think we need to take this as a good conversation. And I think we actually seem to be talking to one another. And might I suggest that we take a half an hour suspension and actually do some talking, as opposed to, well, you know what, let's continue on this. We'll go back to deciding that this will happen after the committee meeting. we're actually talking to one another. And I think, friends, I've said it before, we have done good work together in the past. We have done really good work. What we were able to do with protections in Parliament, with remote voting, and with what we did on the pandemic, coming forward with real recommendations was good work. And I think it would be worth it to suspend for half an hour and talk to one another.
Mr. Blakey.
Sure. If I may, I think we're at a bit of a delicate moment, and there's some promise of progress, which I certainly don't want to lose. And so I think it is important to start from a place of not impugning motive. There are two proposals forward, it seems to me, from my Liberal colleagues that I think are not consistent, and so the committee has to choose one way forward or not. On the one hand, we've heard Ms. Duncan's plea to have a bit of a suspension and a conversation between all the parties on how we might move forward. On the other hand, we have Ms. Pettipas-Taylor and Mr. Turnbull who have asked for something in writing from the opposition. And of course, the opposition is not monolithic. We're three different parties with three different interests and quite often three different points of view. Sometimes we agree on certain matters. We've agreed on the substance of Ms. Vecchio's motion, but other times we do not agree on many things. So if the Liberals on the committee would like something in writing or a concrete formal proposal from three different parties working together, that takes some time. I don't think that's something that's going to happen with a brief suspension in this meeting. It's something that I'm open to offering if the three parties that I just referred to can find a common proposal. I'm hopeful that we could, but there's no guarantee at the outset. That's its own process. So what I'm proposing is that I think it would be productive if the government members want something formal from the three opposition parties for us to have some time in order to do that. There is time between today's meeting and the next meeting. What that allows for in the meantime, as Mr. Turnbull said, he's very excited about offering more thoughts on his own amendment. He can do that today up until 5 minutes to 1 Eastern time, at which point we should have a vote and decide on that amendment and then enter into that period between meetings where the government has asked the opposition parties to speak and see if we can come up with a common proposal, which we will bring to Thursday's meeting. And at that meeting, we'll have already cleared the way, so to speak, for some kind of new attempt at a compromise. It may end up not being any more successful than Mr. Turnbull's first attempt. But at the very least, we'd be trying something new and working towards some kind of new compromise, and it may precipitate a second productive conversation. So that's why I think it would be best to go with the idea that the opposition parties are going to try to propose a way forward. We will do our best. That is going to take some time. I don't think it'll happen on a suspension of this particular meeting. And I think as a sign of the progress of today's conversation, dispensing with the current amendment would be a good way to conclude this meeting and have the kind of maximally open posture at the beginning of the next meeting to try and get towards some kind of compromise.
Okay. I believe, Ms. Vecchio, you had kind of raised your hand as Mr. Blakey was speaking. Did you want to reply?
Honestly, I feel like saying thank you, Dad, as in thank you, Daniel. You've done a great job. And if you're at the head of my family circle, that would have been exactly the type of words my father would have said. So thank you, Daniel. You've done a great job, and I really appreciate those words.
Okay. All right. We have a speakers list. We kind of went on off ramp for a little bit there, which was probably a good thing. But I have been keeping track, and so far the speakers list is Ms. Pettipas-Taylor, Mr. Turnbull, Dr. Duncan, Mr. Callaway, and Mr. Blakey maybe, but I'm not sure. That was probably up and down a lot of hands. Okay, not Mr. Blakey. So Ms. Pettipas-Taylor, you have the floor. Back to you. On mute.
I'm sorry after all that. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I guess that I'm going to get back to my reflections on the extended debate that we're having on Mr. Turnbull's amendment that he brought forward. And before I get going, I guess, on my comments, I first of all wanted to thank the members that are joining us today. Mike Calloway, thank you so much for subbing in for one of our members. And also Andy Fillmore, thank you so much, Andy, and Robert Morrissey. It's always great to have our colleagues with us. I have to say, I feel like I've got the Atlantic Canada Brigade with me today, so that's always great. Before I get going as well, I know that we're talking a lot about, again, Ryan's amendment that he's brought forward. And I know that many of us, or perhaps there's two camps. I think that there's one camp that certainly believes that the reason for prorogation was related to wheat. And that is the arguments that continue to be brought forward. And again, yesterday in the House of Commons, I was fortunate that I was there on House duty. And a lot of the comments, again, were making reference exactly to that again. But I guess on this side, I have to say that I am truly convinced, and my opinion is still that if a global pandemic is not a time to set an agenda again, I don't know when it would be an appropriate time to move forward with setting new priorities. And I truly believe that if we look back in August of last year, we knew what the situation was back then. Many of us spoke about a possible second wave, third wave, and hopefully not fourth wave, but those were the types of things that we were talking about and knowing very well that could be a possibility. And I have to say, I'm extremely pleased and proud that our government chose to reset that agenda again, because the realities today, and today I really want to reflect on where we are today and making a reference as to if we didn't make the changes back then, we would have been really, really ill-equipped to deal with the challenges that many Canadians are faced with. And I know that my honorable colleagues sometimes don't like to hear me talk about where things are at right now, but I think we can't forget, because sometimes we do forget. You know, last year we thought we were in a bad situation. We never thought that we were going to get to where we were, or some of us perhaps did, but we had to make sure that the plans were in place. So I want to talk about a bit about the justification, and again, why I feel that Minister Freeland and Minister Chager would be well placed to provide us with some information as to the thought process that was involved in putting together a new throne speech and really resetting, recalibrating to move forward to deal with really a huge reality that we had to face with. Premièrement aussi, je pense qu'on doit se souvenir.
We must also remember that COVID-19 isn't a partisan thing. The pandemic isn't either. You know, no political party was involved in COVID. I want to be honest. Very often, the pandemic actually exploits these political divisions. Sometimes we don't work in very close collaboration, and the pandemic sort of makes the most of that. And as parliamentarians, I hope that we will be able to work closely together so that we can put an end to the pandemic that has affected everyone around the world, so many people. We've all been affected or touched in a way, and we all have a role to play here to ensure that we can end this pandemic. So, Madam Chair, I'd also like, as a compassionate thing, I would like to suggest to all Canadians that are listening today, or tell them that I understood and heard their worries, the fact that they're worried for themselves, their friends, their family, their province, their community. And just as they are worried, I also am. I'm worried about my neighbors in Nova Scotia. I'm worried for all people who have been hit by this pandemic. We are at a critical stage of the pandemic. The fight of this pandemic. And this third wave is hitting people everywhere in the country. I've mentioned Nova Scotia, but it's been a month now that a month ago we had the things under control in Nova Scotia, but as we saw, things can change very quickly. And so it'd be nice if Minister Freeland could appear and come speak to us, because once again, I don't know if you remember, but I said that Ms. Freeland is also the Deputy Prime Minister, and she was heading the COVID-19 Cabinet Committee. So she could come and talk to us about how they develop these programs that help Canadians. The number of people being admitted in intensive care are through the roof. So this third wave is really hitting Canadians hard. As I mentioned earlier, we are faced with an unprecedented situation, and so we must respond together quickly with unprecedented measures. Madam Freeland actually held a lot of consultations with members of cabinet, and I think she would be well placed to come and talk to us about all these plans, this new plan that they implemented, and the prorogation. The government helped Canada, everyone in Canada, and so we will keep on supporting Canadians. Recently, we took measures and helped all provinces that are dealing with new cases. We are continuously conversing with our counterparts, provincial and territorial counterparts, to increase their capacity to fight against the pandemic. So once again, I'm not going to mention all the different programs that have been put in place this last year, but I think Minister Freeland could share a lot of information on this topic, share with us her reflections, and talk to us about what her and her colleagues and the Prime Minister worked on. We are working with provinces when it comes to vaccination. About 18 million doses have been sent across the country, and 16 million doses have been administered. So things are going along nicely, but we must keep protecting one another as this vaccination rollout takes place. The virus has often showed us that it's very dangerous, it is sneaky, and it can really hit us hard if we're not too careful and we don't take it seriously. COVID-19, as I said earlier, is not a partisan thing. It is really hitting all of our communities, and we must try and prevent that. Again, I think having Minister Freeland appear would be great, and she could contribute to the redaction of our final report on prorogation. We must keep an eye on infection rates and make sure that people are safe in their communities. So, even though we're extremely tired, we must keep working hard at this. We have to keep following public health guidelines and make individual and collective efforts to put an end to the spread of the virus.
Vaccination is the finish line, but we have to all protect each other until we're all protected. Business, government, families, and communities must do everything possible to reduce the risks of transmitting the virus to others. Last week when we were talking, I had said that my spouse had had the privilege of receiving his vaccine. I'm very happy to tell you that tomorrow I have my appointment at 1 p.m. and I'm sure that I'm not going to I make it to the appointment. Health Canada has authorized 4 vaccines to fight COVID-19: Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Janssen & Janssen. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, yes?
Hearing some popping of your mic. It seems to be positioned very well. Like, I don't know what to suggest necessarily, but maybe like we were having Mr. Blakey, fold it inwards. Maybe you can fold it a little bit outwards or move it outwards a bit, and the popping might stop.
Est-ce que je pourrais demander à la traductrice?
Can I ask the interpreter if it's better? Yes. Yes, it's apparently better. The interpreter has given a hands up. Yes, thumbs up. Thank you very much. Sorry, we don't want to break our interpreter's ears, so as soon as there's a problem, please let me know. I'm going to try to speak more slowly.
The flow, I think you were on which vaccines had been approved.
Bien. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll begin that short paragraph. Health Canada authorized four vaccines, as we all know: Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson. As recently as last week, there was very good news. Health Canada had authorized the use of the Pfizer vaccine for children aged 12 to 15. And I know that where I'm from, lots of people are most encouraged to see this development. All authorized vaccines have proven themselves to be effective in preventing hospitalizations and death. But as I've already said, the distribution of vaccines to the provinces and territories is going well. Over 18 million vaccine doses authorized to fight COVID-19 have been sent to the provinces and territories, and over 15 million Canadians have received their first dose. And again, these figures were from last week. I know that the figures are continuing to increase slowly but surely, so we're on the right track. We received 2 million Pfizer-BioNTech doses last week, and this was an important delivery. They came from this manufacturer and last week, Minister of Public Service and Procurement, Minister Anand, my colleague, announced that Canada has reserved vaccines from Pfizer for the year 2022 and 2023, with options to extend until 2024. As we often repeat, we will be there for Canadians in the fight against COVID-19 with whatever is needed and for as long as we need to be. We want eligible Canadians who want to get vaccinated have a chance to be able to access a vaccine well before September 2021. This is part of our commitment to the provinces and territories with whom we are fighting in solidarity against COVID-19. Once again, Chair, I think the Cabinet Committee that worked so hard over the last year and a half, I think they could really share with us what they were thinking with this whole issue of vaccine distribution. And I think that Madam Freeland would be in a good position to come and share her thoughts with us on the subject. We're going to continue to collaborate with our colleagues, and we're going to continue to provide the assistance that they may need to them so that we can tamp down outbreaks and ensure the safety of Canada's population. We may need to buy and distribute vaccines and personal protective equipment, buying screening tests, rapid screening tests, and making it easier to use them. To use private sector companies to distribute rapid testing and intensify contact tracing. For every $10 that's spent fighting the pandemic, $8 comes from the federal government. Once again, we have made massive investments because we want to be sure that Canadians are protected. We have asked Canadians to do incredible things, and we're still asking them to stay home in so many cases in regions where there are outbreaks. So we have to be there. We've always said, in English, we said we have their backs. But we have to be sure that the programs are there. Programs have been developed. And the whole issue of a new speech from the throne and prorogation was really to think about how to be sure that we had the right programs that could be set up to meet the needs of Canadians, all Canadians. A large part of local support comes from the support initiative for rapid intervention. The program is part of the Safe Restart programs, and safe free lunch programs. And this is distributed to millions of dollars to provinces and territories so that they can increase the capacity of their health institutions, intensify screening and contact tracing, and provide epidemiological support and other services, social services, to Canadians who need them. In this way, provinces and territories can react more efficiently when there's an outbreak and thus reduce the spread in hotspots. In other words, where pressure on the healthcare network is greatest. They can also provide places for people to go if they've got COVID-19 or if they have been in contact with people who are infected, and if they can't otherwise isolate. Madam Chair, clearly, this money could also be used to consolidate existing services where the needs are greatest. Again, I think we have to recognize that provinces and territories are all different jurisdictions, and realities are very different from one province to the next. Here in New Brunswick, I'm happy, and knock on wood, we have 142 active cases in the whole province. But as we know, it could change from overnight. And so we have to be sure that provinces and territories have the control over the investments and over the health policies that are implemented. We're there to support them through this process. The program I'm referring to has 8 areas of intervention: public health rapid response, outbreak management, vaccination support, COVID-19 screening, laboratory services and equipment, contact tracing, safe isolation spaces for voluntary isolation, and recruiting human resources. Here's another way in which we can see that this series of priorities has been implemented to assist the population. And this is not something that really existed if you look at the speech from the throne in 2019. So again, this was the result of a lot of reflection, and that's how we were able to come up with these priorities. Recently, we were able to assist health systems in difficulty, including Ontario's, with assistance programs for healthcare human resources. Our program will help provinces and territories have a reimbursement if they need to use health human resources from another jurisdiction. This will also help to provide human resources to intensive care units. The funding will be used to support specialized care by deploying personnel where and when it's needed. And this includes nursing staff, intensive care, critical care staff, doctors, etc. And because this is National Nursing Week, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate and thank, from the bottom of my heart, all of the nurses who are doing such an outstanding job in this wonderful country. They are really our superheroes on the front lines. And we should all be thankful to them. Once again, I'm very happy that our province, and we saw from Newfoundland and Labrador a few weeks ago, we were able to send troops to Ontario to help them during these tough times. And we're Canadian, and we're family members, and we're here to help each other. So I was very happy to see that Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador were able to send people to Ontario to help. Every province and territory could receive up to $20 million for the deployment of human resources to other places that need them. This is an opportunity to really show teamwork across the country. Provinces and territories are ready to help each other out, and the federal government is watching over the deployment of the necessary financial resources to be sure that human resources are where needs are greatest. Now I'd like to talk about screening tests. Screening tests, together with public health measures, are the main ways to slow the spread of COVID-19. To date, over 25 million rapid test kits have been sent to the provinces and territories. Using them with federal action, millions of rapid tests have been distributed throughout the country. Several provinces and territories have announced that rapid tests will be now available for businesses in their provinces. This follows the successful distribution of over 1.2 million rapid tests to long-term care institutions, hospitals, homeless shelters, and hotspots where the virus was spreading quickly. Rapid testing is useful and can contribute to identifying asymptomatic cases or pre-symptomatic cases, which makes it possible to isolate people who have COVID-19 sooner. And that way we can tamp down the spread of COVID-19 in workplaces and other places. As I've already said, Madam Sahota, the government is continuing to closely collaborate with all of provinces and territories. We work closely with them to be able to ensure that they have the necessary tools to fight the pandemic. This includes providing rapid tests and PCR tests for them. These are in addition to other public health measures. The idea is to have an additional layer of protection that can contribute to providing and ensuring the health and safety of workers. We also worked in close collaboration with provincial and territorial governments to strengthen the health systems and adapt the healthcare system to the difficulties being experienced providing healthcare during the pandemic. The 2021 budget, or the budget that was just announced, provides for $100 million in funding for 3 years so as to promote innovative innovations for mental health, because we know that many groups have been affected disproportionately by COVID-19. This includes healthcare workers, frontline workers, young people, seniors, Indigenous peoples, racialized communities, and Black Canadians. Friends, this past weekend I visited my Aunt Lillian in a home here in Moncton. She's 99. She's 90 years old, and she's doing very well cognitively, and she's had both vaccines. She's very happy and very grateful. But she still feels like she's a prisoner in her residence. And she's trying to see some signs that life is going to come back to normal because it's been a very difficult year for her. So we can see that in terms of mental health, stress is not just on young people, but also amongst the elderly, and we can't forget that. There's so many community organizations that are so incredible in Canada. Many of them are in our provinces. They're close to the grassroots, and they know better than anyone else how to provide services. We'd like to help them, especially now, because we see that there's an increase in demand for their kind of services. I said at the beginning of the pandemic that we could really see a tsunami of the whole issue of mental health. And now we're seeing it, and we have to address it. Fortunately, we continue to observe a marked decrease in the number of outbreaks in long-term care homes. We're taking care that residents and caregivers in long-term care homes are well supported. In the fall economic statement, we devoted $10.4 million to the Canadian Foundation for the Improvement of Healthcare Services. The funding is used to extend the long-term care program so as to increase intervention capacity during a pandemic. I must say that the Foundation is doing a terrific job to assist long-term care homes in the country so that they can be better equipped to prevent infection and to take other necessary measures to protect the residents. I think this is something that is a priority for all of us. There are over 350 healthcare establishments in long-term care and retirement homes that are receiving assistance in this program. And in closing, a few reflections regarding the importance of public health care instructions. Vaccination is going well. But as we've already said, and as we can all see, we are not yet out of the woods. Even people who have been vaccinated, like my Aunt Eliane, have to continue to follow the basic public health guidelines, which have made it possible for us to remain safe up until now. Even if numbers are increasing every day, most Canadians have not received their 2 doses of the vaccine. So until then, we have to base ourselves on public health measures to continue to contain the pandemic and protect the population of Canada. If we open up or remove restrictions too soon or too quickly, the number of cases is going to spike, as the statistical modeling has shown us from the beginning. Scientists were accurate. They said if we remove restrictions too quickly, or if you don't apply them enough, or seriously and strictly enough, people are going to get sick, and some of those people are going to die. This is reality. Even if it's tough on our morale, and even if we're all exhausted, this is not the time to give up. We have to all commit to continue to apply public health measures because they work. So again, I don't think there's any magic recipe here. We all know what we have to do. We have to continue to follow the guidelines. And again, if you're looking at why we chose to prorogue Parliament, well, we wanted to be sure that we were going to have an agenda that was going to really meet the needs of Canadians for this perhaps second or third wave that we're now experiencing. So, Madam Chair, I don't know how long I've been speaking. I don't want to take away any of my colleagues' time, so I think that I will now turn the floor over to perhaps my friend and colleague, Mr. Turnbull, and then I would come back with comments a little later on if time permits. Thank you very much.
Turnbull.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to my colleague, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, for her important remarks. And I do appreciate several of the things that she chose to focus on, in particular, the grassroots organizations and the importance of those organizations across our communities to help people who are vulnerable is something that really struck me as important for us to remember, but also the importance of the public health measures that when lifted too early or not applied as rigorously as needed can lead to waves or spikes in cases and waves of COVID-19 that we certainly at this point, I think, have become, I don't know what the right word is, but I'm certainly ready for COVID-19 to be over. I'm sure all of us are. And I know the constituents in my riding are at their wits' end. Their lives have been so dramatically impacted on so many levels, and it's really just the challenge of a lifetime that we're all living through. So really want to bring empathy to the challenges associated with this on every level, but also work across the aisle with my colleagues to find a way forward in the important work of this committee. So I did appreciate the opening discussion that we had, which was, sort of impromptu, seemed to be kind of, on a cross-partisan scale that, maybe we could find a bit of a way forward. And that's always encouraging. I relish those moments when they occur in our Parliament today and in our committee work as well. I want to, I've been making an argument for quite some time that I feel is important and worth making. And it's really an argument for the amendment that I put forward to Ms. Vecchio's original motion, which, as most of you know by now, was an attempt to compromise. I understand that the opposition parties still really are, clinging to seeing the Prime Minister appear. That wasn't in my amendment. Certainly my amendment focused on, I think, providing further rationale and evidence and testimony from witnesses that I think would be able to give us additional perspective I think the Prime Minister's perspective has been shared with us through the report that was tabled on prorogation, which I probably don't need to remind anybody at this point was a change to the standing orders that our government actually implemented in the last Parliament, which I think is a positive step forward. I know my colleague Mr. Blakey talks about this being precedent setting, that our committee is delving into the reasons for prorogation, and I think that's great. I think we really have set precedents, both in requiring a report to be tabled in the House and then referred to this committee, but also just in hearing like the willingness that our government has shown to study the reasons for prorogation. And further to that, I think that the two main witnesses that I would think would be, based on every bit of information I've been able to gather, would be really helpful is the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth. And I've made a pretty detailed argument for why I think that's important and why I think those two witnesses can offer some testimony that I think could really, enhance our ability as a committee to finish our report and make recommendations. And I think, to me, that's the nature of the study that we were undertaking when Ms. Vecchio put forward her motion, which looked as though it was really just trying to assume a motive, a rather nefarious motive on behalf of our government for proroguing Parliament, when I think there's a completely rational explanation for why it was necessary, why the time was well used to connect with stakeholders and reset the sort of agenda that the government had at the time. And I want to continue with that a little bit, because what I find, again and again, and I will repeat this point because for emphasis sake, I really do think it's important that we recognize that really, if a global pandemic is not a good enough reason to prorogue Parliament, then really nothing is. And I stand by that claim. I've made it every single speech I've given in this committee since Ms. Vecchio put forward her original motion has been focused on arguing that really is the crux of the matter, in my view, which is that for some reason opposition parties don't see the global pandemic as a good reason for the Prime Minister to use his prerogative, or her prerogative, in this case he, but to hope one day we have a female Prime Minister in Canada in the near future. But I would just say that the global pandemic has been deeper and more severe in terms of economic impact, and I'm not even, again, focused for this particular debate on the health impacts, which are far greater and should be the primary concern, and I've said that as well. But I've focused my arguments and all the data and evidence gathering that I've done to make my argument, on understanding the depth of economic impact, the severity of that, how it impacts different segments of the population across Canada unevenly and disproportionately, impacts people who may be historically disadvantaged in some way, or from an equity-seeking group of one kind or another. And I've gone to great lengths to demonstrate that to this committee, in hopes that the members opposite would see the light and come around to hopefully supporting my amendment. I know that may seem like a vain hope, but I still maintain that there's good reason and rationale to support hearing from two more witnesses, i.e. the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth. And I will say this, that the recession in 2008 and 2009 really pales in comparison to the global pandemic and its economic impact. And I've gathered some additional information on that was relevant at the time. I've been using a lot of detailed statistical data that was gathered by the Chief Statistician of Canada in a report that was published in the fall of 2020, early fall. So it was right around the time of prorogation that information would have been utilized to make decisions. And we really see that it informed the throne speech. Well, I also have done a little bit of research in my spare time, of which I have tons. Not true. But I found quite a bit of really good information to substantiate how different and deep the current economic crisis is in comparison to the 2008-2009 financial crisis, or sometimes referred to as the Great Recession, which really seems like kind of a blip at this point compared to what we're going through today. I'm going to refer to a sort of document published by First Policy Response, June 3rd, 2020. And it really highlights the difference between 2008 versus 2020. The article or compilation, I guess it is what the subtitle is, what's different this time around. And it's got several contributors, and I'll quote some of them, and I think it's important. They're all very, I think, renowned professionals. So one is Kevin Milligan, professor of economics.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Vecchio.
Perhaps we can ask Mr. Turnbull if he could cite what he's reading. I think he's reading a study that was pre-prorogation, why it's a different, and I'm just trying to get the date so that how this lines up to his motion. If he could just tell me when this was actually written from, because I don't know if it's actually talking about the 2019 prorogation at all. That's why I'm asking. Or I'm sorry, the 2020 prorogation. I don't think if it was written prior that it'd actually be talking about the 2020 prorogation and have anything to do with this amendment.
Maybe I can speak to that, Madam Chair. I'd be happy to answer that question for Ms. Vecchio. So I did just say June 3rd, 2020 was when it was published. But so my point is that at that point, this information was relevant. The stakeholders that are quoted in this publication would have been all renowned economists that said things about the 2020 economic crisis that we're living through still today that substantiate the claim that I've been making, or the argument that I've been making, that the economic impact of COVID-19 is many, many times greater than the economic recession in 2008, 2009. That I would add that Stephen Harper used as his excuse, or his reason, I should say, rationale for proroguing Parliament twice. Once in 2008 and once in 2009. So I really think that this speaks to why we would hear from the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, who I would think has heard from some of these stakeholders, and probably even her team of highly trained professionals would have been aware of this document, which I think helps highlight why this economic crisis is both unique but also far greater than the one that occurred in 2008, 2009. So I would think that would be relevant information. It certainly echoes many of the other things that I've been saying in this committee, and also, really I think supports in many ways the data that the Chief Statistician of Canada had gathered, which was slightly later, but did include this time period as well. So, and I think it helps us understand the first wave of COVID-19. So back to what I was saying, which was that Kevin Milligan, the professor of economics from the Vancouver School of Economics, said the main difference between the 2008-2009 financial crisis and today's pandemic-induced recession is which side of the economy was hit, the demand or supply side. Public health restrictions have shut down entire markets. for goods and services. And it's not a lack of spending power from the demand side as it was in 2008. In fact, in this particular crisis, consumers have a lack of ability to purchase the same basket of goods and services, whether it be because of a fear for workers or consumers or because of public health restrictions in place. The economic crisis we're in is very different in kind than the 2008 2009 crisis, which was a demand side shock. So we're seeing a supply side shock as a result of this pandemic, which is very different. It means that because so many workplaces have been closed down or work stoppages have been so far-reaching, that in fact there's a real shock to the supply side of the economy. So and this really informs how we should move forward. It informs how we can't simply apply, again, this to Ms. Vecchio's point is a reason why a government would need to stop and reflect from time to time on how, what its priorities are and how it understands this crisis from a health perspective, an economic perspective, from a social perspective, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's exactly why prorogation was used in this case. So to me, it's all very relevant to and rational. I use that word a lot. I'm sorry to say that, but I keep saying it's rational. It makes sense. It's rational. Like, it lines up. There's reasons and evidence, and like I studied formal and informal logic, and like I believe debate is supposed to be about argument and reasons and evidence, and not just saying things that are untrue or trying to persuade people to believe something because it serves your political interests. I believe that we're actually being evidence-based, and like, I totally get that it's no government is perfect, and there's always, and especially in a pandemic, when you're in a public health crisis and there's a virus that's not completely understood, that things are going to change, evidence is going to evolve, and scientific research is kind of catching up to a virus that's mutating, and in a way almost surpassing human knowledge in terms of its ability to grapple with what that virus entails. But again, to the point that I'm trying to make here, which is that taking some time to understand that this economic crisis that is caused by the public health crisis is different. It's very different. You couldn't take the fiscal measures and even the framework or the understanding of the previous 2008-2009 crisis and just apply it to this one. It would not work. It would not be successful, and there's many, many reasons for that. So, for example, in 2008, the strategy to deal with the economic recession at the time was to re-stoke demand by promoting investment, injecting cash into households, and ensure financial sector balance sheets could support the resumption of lending. In the pandemic, we know that family income and business cash supports are necessary to keep the economy just idling at a point so that it prevents bankruptcies. This is why I think our government, implemented things like the commercial rent subsidy and helped to work on making mortgage payment deferrals accessible, providing small business supports and loans. This was to prevent bankruptcies right across our economy. We also know that in the pandemic, we wanted to prevent excessive debt that weighs down demand going forward. This is the rationale probably I would think, for direct payments to families, which we saw a lot of during this pandemic, and our government in particular, the CERB, as we all know, and why that was so important. for families out there. However, demand side measures will not get the economy back to full speed as long as the virus restricts economic activities. So we can continue to try to bolster demand. But in a way, we still have these very large supply side adjustments. The ways of working are different and may continue to be different for some time. Socially distanced workplaces may need to maintain a level of distancing in those workplaces for some time. So, and we don't know, I mean, I don't claim to know all the answers for that, but I will say that based on the evidence around the time that prorogation happened or just before, there was, quite a lot of economists saying, well, yeah, like some of these supply side adjustments are going to be in place for quite some time, which has a bearing on how the economy might recover and what measures would be helpful. Again, just justifying that it takes time to reflect on that. Just as Mr. Blakey said earlier in his comments that he needed time to reflect and have conversations with other parties to come up with a potential amendment that might be a counter proposal that could move this committee forward. It takes a bit of time to reflect and work through those conversations. I think that's quite natural when you're undertaking a once in a lifetime or once in 100-year epic crisis of epic proportions. So when we get back to what I was saying, which is that there's supply side adjustments with the ways of working are different. The ways of households, caregiving and working from home have changed. And even consumption patterns, the ways of consuming for Canadians have changed dramatically. So you have these sort of three levels that, work and households and consumption patterns are all changing. And these are all supply side adjustments. And they're kind of daunting because it's hard to understand the costs and the challenges that those create. And again, I made previous arguments as to how the economic impact actually affects different industries differently as well. So there's inequity even in how industries are coping and some of the structural challenges that some of the businesses have. I think about businesses in my community, a few of them that have had to shut down seem to all fall into a category where they have a very high overhead cost. And so often due to a facility that they run, like one of the places that it's like an indoor playground for kids, where they have a very high overhead cost to run their business. And restaurants would be another example where the overhead cost is quite high. And imagine not being able to generate revenue and still having some of those costs. And this is exactly why our government put in place the commercial rent subsidy, which we've talked about before. I want to quote this Kevin Milligan, the professor of economics from the Vancouver School of Economics. He said the best way to minimize these costs is to strongly support public health measures needed to suppress the virus sharply. And that, I mean, I found that, just the fact that I could find that quote as early as June 3rd, 2020, sort of provides even more evidence to back up what my colleague Ms. Petty-Pot-Taylor was saying, which was that the public health measures are some of the most important tools in our toolbox to suppressing the community spread of the virus. But also they're the best economic recovery measures because we know that wave after wave, the small businesses and many of the industries are struggling because they can't get a foothold back into doing business again. So we see sometimes different leaders across the country lifting those public health measures prematurely. And I think what we need to all do is encourage those to stay in place to get the case numbers down as low as possible, because it's good for the primary reason is it's the right thing to do for saving human health and ensuring that this virus doesn't mutate beyond the effectiveness of our vaccines, but also that it is the best thing to do from an economic perspective as well. So it's not just good for human health, which should be a reason, like we shouldn't need any other reasons, in my view, but if you do need other reasons, it's also better for the economy. I read a paper a while back on the sunk cost fallacy, which I thought was really interesting because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to fallacies. And fallacies, for anybody that doesn't know, is this word we use in philosophy, which is referring to mistakes in reasoning. And they're common mistakes. They're mistakes that people make a lot, and there's all kinds of different fallacies out there that there's been books written, expounding all the different types of fallacies, all the mistakes in reasoning that we can have as human beings. And there's lots, but the sunk cost fallacy is an interesting one because it really applies to this pandemic, in seeing the economic hardship that's brought about by public health restrictions can really impact on leaders' willingness and ability to make decisions about imposing those measures in a successive wave of COVID-19. And this is called the sunk cost fallacy, because you assume you projecting the cost of the previous wave into the future wave, but not looking beyond that. And I think it provides a bit of a rationale. And I have a lot of empathy for leaders that are in those positions of decision making and power, for having to make those difficult decisions. Although in many cases, I think perhaps the decisions have fallen prey to this sunk cost fallacy. But listen, I'll leave that, and I'd be happy to provide anyone with a link to that article too, if Ms. Vecchio would like to review the sunk cost fallacy. I'd be happy to provide it. But anyway, at any rate, I will continue moving on. I want to speak to another, I think, prominent expert. I don't know this individual per se, but his name is Mike Moffat, Senior Director at Smart Prosperity Institute. And this, again, goes back to my argument that the current economic crisis is much greater and more substantial than the 2008-2009 economic recession. Mike Moffat agrees in the paper that he wrote that we are definitely going through a supply side shock, but he also talks about how there are demand side implications or even shocks that are triggered by the supply side shock. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So he uses the example that a tornado in the US Midwest could take out, and this is hypothetical, so it hasn't happened, but you could very easily foresee it happening at some point. So it's a possible scenario that could be real, but it's a hypothetical for now. A tornado in the Midwest United States if it were to take out assemblers of automobiles, it would create a demand side shock in Canada for auto part suppliers. We have big auto part suppliers. Obviously, the demand for their supplies or auto parts would be dramatically impacted if all of a sudden two big auto assemblers in the US were to be hit by a tornado and not able to function. So that's one scenario. Another is, imagine that if the tornado hit, God forbid, southwestern Ontario and took out auto assemblers in southwestern Ontario. This would create a supply side shock, but also a demand component too, because auto suppliers will still take a hit. So, I think what it's important to recognize is that the current crisis that we're in is not as simple as just saying the economy has been hit by a supply side shock. There are ripple effects across our supply chains that also create demand supply shocks as well. And I think that's his main point. So to add on to the previous expert that I was mentioning, which was Kevin Milligan, professor of economics. This individual, really speaks to how, again, we have to develop a more sophisticated understanding of how our economy has been impacted, and to understand what measures to put in place to actually help it recover. And I think, again, that it's very rational to think that you might want to, as a government, helping lead a country through a massive 100-year crisis, take some time and reflect on what really is the impact of this current crisis, so that you can target measures of different kinds to the real situation that we're in. And I talk about situational leadership, and I've had several people tell me that there are different assessments of what constitutes situational leadership. But in my view, it's a heightened sensitivity and responsiveness to the very particular circumstances, the changing circumstance in a given situation. And showing leadership within that is the ability to assess, evaluate, gather information quickly, and make sense of the many different aspects of a crisis or any situation. And so, and obviously it's heightened in a like that. The need for situational leadership is heightened within a global public health crisis, of course, or any form of crisis. So I think crisis management in general requires situational leadership. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, so sorry about that, but I certainly will get back to my remarks here, which in terms of my argument, each view of the world, like the supply side shock or the demand side shock, which was 2008, 2009, or some mixture of the two, really has an impact on how large the economic decline is, what sort of inflation will look like, how interest rates will reflect that or impact that, whether stagflation is an issue or not. In the 1970s, there was a sort of stagflation that came out of the supply side shock then, and it led to moderate economic decline, substantial increases in nominal interest rates, inflation pressures that either forced the Bank of Canada to abandon the 2% inflation target or cause them to hike interest rates even further. In our case, I think what we're seeing is, and this is changing, a much larger economic decline than in 1970, relatively modest impact on inflation and interest rates. Pressure is kind of upward or downward depending on the relative magnitudes of the shocks, and no stagflation to date. Stagflation, by the way, just in case people are wondering, I hate using academic sounding words, but sometimes I do. Stagflation is characterized by slow economic growth and relatively high unemployment. I see my colleague, Ms. Pettypot-Taylor, smiling, and it's making me smile, but I'm sorry for using these academic buzz terms. But, again, stagflation is characterized by slow economic growth and relatively high unemployment, which, obviously is economic stagnation, but at the same time accompanied by rising prices, so inflation. So, you're seeing a stagnation in the economy, but an inflation of prices. And this is why stagflation is something of real concern or potential concern. Madam Chair, I've got lots more to say, but I'm also conscious of time. I really want to, before I finish up, I have a few other things that I really feel I need to say. And there's two other, I think, really important contributors to the paper or the compilation that I'm quoting from and sort of using as some of my evidence base for my argument today. the one person that I would refer you to is David McDonald, senior economist at Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And he says the job losses during the Great Recession of 2008, 2009 were a garden party compared to what has happened since March 2020. And then he says you have to go back to the 30s to see anything like it. But even then, the comparison stops after the first month. And I did a bit of an analysis of this graph that was shown in this paper, and it's really interesting to see how the job losses compare. And this gentleman, David McDonald, took 5 of the top sort of economic crises, recessions, depressions, however we refer to them. So the recession of 91, 92, what he calls the dirty 30s, which I don't like that term. I'm not sure why it's called that, but maybe someone else can tell me if they know a bit more about that history. The Great Recession, which is 2008, 2009, and then the recession of 1981, 1982. I know the 30s refers to the Great Depression, I think. So when you look at these 4 in comparison to the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the only one that even comes close to comparing is the recession in the 1930s, or the Depression, I should say. And it only compares for the first month or two, and it's only about a negative, like a decline in job loss, or a job loss of about 5%. Whereas at this point in time, which was when this paper was written in June 3rd, 2020, so this was really early in the pandemic, the crisis we're in is almost 16% decline over the first 2 months in terms of job losses. So again, it's from 5% to almost 16%. So the steep, we talk about, I think the Minister of Finance has mentioned a V-shaped recovery. Well, the V-shaped recovery refers to the drop in job losses has been so great and so many times greater that it's like a cliff. It looks like a cliff. And the idea is that if our measures, our fiscal measures are working, then we could see a rebound of that economy, a V-shaped recovery, which is a very steep incline of job gains. And we started to see that recently before the third wave was really upon us. And the job numbers were incredible. Like there were 300,000 jobs gained in 1 month. And that was, the previous month was a similar number. So I think that was February, if I'm not mistaken. And so the job, the rebound of the economy is impressive. And again, I think it actually provides another point of rationale that's now obviously in the future compared to where we would have been at the time of prorogation. But when you look at what happened as a result of prorogation and then tie it back to the information that was accessible at that time, I think it actually helps to show, okay, what the government has done was evidence informed, and on top of it, it's working. And so, again, I without, arrogance, like I don't mean to sound arrogant at all. I'm just literally saying that seems to make sense to me. It adds up. It's rational. It's targeted. It took time to reflect. This gentleman, David McDonald, says this represents a seismic shift in how we fight recessions when private debt is high and interest rates are low. Instead of encouraging debt, we put money into people's pockets at an unprecedented scale. And what he says that because in the article that he writes, or the contributions he makes, he basically points to how the thing that's different about this crisis, and others have said it's both supply side and demand side shocks at the same time, but it's also there's already a level of debt out there in our economy, or was leading up to this crisis, that was beyond maybe perhaps what we've seen in other recessions or other crises of this proportion. And again, this one doesn't even measure up.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Ms. Vecchio.
Sorry, my husband's cutting grass outside, so I hope you can hear me. I'm just looking at the, sorry, he's coming around the front. I'm just looking at it being 12:55, and we had a great conversation earlier. I was just wondering whether we could come to that vote as previously discussed. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess we are on the perfect person right now anyways, and so I'll hand it back to Mr. Turnbull since it's his amendment, and perhaps he'll want to share that with us.
Well, I'm not finished my remarks and not prepared for a vote just yet. I'm still hoping that we get a counter proposal from the opposition parties in writing that we can sort of look at, but I'll leave that to them to
Madam Chair.
figure out.
Yes, Ms. Vecchio.
So what I understand is that right now, although we had previously discussed it, Ryan is choosing, or Mr. Turnbull is choosing, that we're not going to go to a vote as we have previously discussed, though we have already said we're working towards a solution. I don't want to lose faith, but I thought that at 12:55 that there was a bit of a consensus that we were going to work together to find some sort of solution. I do know that I'm looking at Daniel and Alain as two other of those opposition members, and I'm just wondering if this is going to continue to filibuster rather than getting to what we really want to do, which is the solution. You can't hear me now?
No, we've lost your, yeah, it's not so much that we can't hear you. You're cutting out because
Oh, I'm
internet.
sorry. I'm so sorry. And I have nothing else on. I just know that working in good faith, and I think that's what many of the members were doing this morning when we were trying to have a very open, transparent, and accountable discussion. We had talked about going to a vote at 12:55, and I think that was very fair. I'm looking at the members of the opposition parties, which we have been asked to, or it was mentioned for us to do something. And I know that in good faith that is actually already started, which is fantastic. We're trying to get somewhere. And I'm just wondering why the speaker is not allowing us to go to the vote. If we are doing our part, why we cannot go to a vote now? I'm just confused.
Okay, by speaker, I'm assuming you're speaking about Mr. Turnbull, who has the floor. It was definitely discussed. I'll let Mr. Turnbull see if he's ready, or the other members. I mean, I guess we'd have we need to see if all the members are willing to not take their turn to speak and move to a vote at this point. Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Ms. Vecchio's comments and that we had a great discussion at the beginning of our meeting, but I don't recall anyone agreeing that there would be a vote. I know it was suggested by Mr. Blakey, but I don't think there was any agreement that we would move to a vote. And I certainly am open to, and I think all members of our party are willing to have discussions about how we move forward. But I don't recall any commitment to having a vote today.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull. I have lost faith because I thought we were having a rational discussion to the internet. I thought we were having a rational discussion this morning where we were coming up with a solution. And I'm sorry, but in good faith, I believe that we were going to go in a vote at 12:55. I believe that all work to it for a resolution, and I'm really concerned that perhaps one of the other members of the opposition who are also expecting something can speak.
Sure, Ms. Vecchio, you're just cutting in and out, and I'm not sure if translation has even been translating what you're saying because there's been so much cutting in and out. So I don't know if all the members can benefit from what you are saying with that happening at this point. Mr. Clerk, can you let us know, was there translation for Ms. Vecchio? Like, you could kind of make out what she was saying because you get the gist of it, but I don't know if translation
Madam Chair,
to follow.
The interpreters were able to catch what Ms. Vecchio was saying. There does seem to have been, I guess, some lag with the internet connection, however, so it was sort of cutting in and out. But the interpreters did get the gist of what Ms. Vecchio did say.
interpreters, excuse me, I misused, I used the incorrect terminology, of course, our interpreters. I will, Ms. Vecchio, do you still want one of your colleagues to?
Perhaps John
Repeat
Nader
yourself?
can take the floor and thanks, John.
Is this a point of order, Madam Chair?
Yeah, I think it is a point of order, and it's a point of order about what's been suggested at the beginning. You know, we've been talking about compromise, talking about coming to a solution and an end on this, and I think the suggestion has been made that we dispose of this amendment. That brings us back to the original motion. It would clear things up for today, and then on Thursday we can come fresh with the original motion and go from there in order to come to a solution and dispose of this matter. I think the opposition here is willing and ready and able to act in good faith and to move forward on this. But if the Liberals are going to continue filibustering for the next 2 months or however long they feel like filibustering, then here we are. So if Mr. Turnbull is not allowing this to come to a vote, I think that's most unfortunate, and we'll go on listening to them filibuster their own amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Blakey, do you have a point of order?
Yeah, well, I guess on the same point of order, really. I just wanted to, sorry, I'm having some digital hand issues there. I just wanted to say or repeat that, you know, I think this is a bit of a delicate moment. I appreciate Mr. Turnbull's point that, you know, it may be that a decision wasn't made to have a vote at 5-1, but there was clearly a call to test the committee, and I don't think that the committee was tested on that. The fact that it wasn't previously doesn't mean that it couldn't be now, and I think it would be an important act of good faith on the part of government members of the committee who've said that they want to try and conduce towards a solution to allow that vote to happen and the meeting to adjourn. Mr. Turnbull stated earlier that time is precious and there isn't a lot of free time for members of parliament at any time, and particularly not now. We're all very busy. Spending the next couple of hours in this meeting is a couple of hours that we can't spend doing those other things in the next 48 hours, where we also are trying to work in an exceptional meeting among the opposition parties in order to have a productive conversation that leads to a formal proposal for the government. And I think that's the kind of lack of time and good faith that might poison the well and cause this otherwise good and opportune moment to pass us by without having produced a solution. So I would beseech my colleagues on the government side of the committee here to allow the vote on the amendment to take place and the meeting to suspend afterward, so that we have on the other side the time to do what they've asked us to do, which is discuss among ourselves. We're not a monolithic group. As I say, it's 3 different political parties that require some time to have that conversation. The idea that that was going to come in writing during this meeting, I think was, certainly optimistic, but I think also equally unrealistic. So we're asking to be able to have the vote, suspend the meeting, take the time, and come back with a proposal. Of course, if the government doesn't like our proposal, there will be time for Mr. Turnbull to move another amendment. This one's clearly dead in the water. So if he wants to take another run at it, that'll be his business. In the meantime, the opposition parties will work together to try and come up with what we think is a next best offer. So I would just, really, exhort my colleagues to not waste what I think is a good moment and to allow things to wrap up on the current amendment, which was one proposal in a negotiation that I think is clearly not gone the way the mover intended, and fair enough, that happens in a negotiation, and to make way for a new proposal, which may succeed and may not, but at least we'd be talking about something new. And that in itself, I think, would be significant in a process now that has taken a very long time with very little movement. Thank you.
I don't know if there were any responses to the point of order or debate on that point of order. It's hard for me to tell because there's hands up to speak to the regular speaking list, and just don't want to miss anybody in. Okay. All right, Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll continue with my remarks because I wasn't quite finished what I had prepared. So I want to get back to another one of the individuals that contributed to this particular paper that I was referencing, which was Alex Himmelfarb, I think is how you say his last name, and my apologies to him for mispronouncing it, who was the former clerk of the Privy Council. So I'll quote the former clerk of the Privy Council. He said, "History provides no perfect analogy for the combined health and socioeconomic catastrophe we now confront. Certainly not since the Depression have we sustained such a broad and deep economic hit. We've rightly spent a lot to provide relief, and we're going to have to spend more depending on our ambitions and possibly a great deal more." So that was a quote that he gave, and I thought it was a really good quote to bring to this committee to, again, substantiate how I think this the economic impact of COVID-19 is far greater than many of the other recessions that we've been through, and even greater in kind and in magnitude than the Great Depression. He also said, and I'll quote again, one more quote from Alex, "Many of the aid programs will have to be extended. Some may have to become permanent. Further public investment will be needed to meet the urgent needs of municipalities and get the economy moving. We can expect debates about objectives, whether simply recovery or also repair of cracks tragically exposed, or whether to refashion a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable economy." So, why I bring these two quotes as some of my final remarks to substantiate everything that I've been saying is that I think the former clerk of the Privy Council was really at the time grappling with, and even recommending and foreseeing that many of our aid programs would have to be extended, which is precisely what the government did, and some which were slightly redesigned. And I know that I've spoken to those before. But what's interesting is, he mentions this sort of key debate at the end of the quote that I used, which is that we can expect debates about objectives, whether simple recovery or also repairing the cracks tragically exposed, or whether to refashion a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable economy. And I think that's a really interesting conversation about whether we're just going to build back at the same, in the same way, in other words, almost reinstall the same inequities that we've experienced throughout this pandemic, or whether we're going to try to address those. I think in our government's evaluation and resetting of its agenda and the considerable time that was taken to do that, which I know only really compromised one sitting day of Parliament, was really, I think, on the mark in terms of what it amounted to, where it focused its attention. And I think it's supported by these remarks from the former clerk of the Privy Council. So I really do think that I've tried to provide more evidence and data to substantiate why the Minister of Finance would be helpful for us to hear from, and to renew that as a plea to the members opposite to hopefully support the amendment that I put forward. And so I'll wrap up there for now, and I thank all the members for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Dr. Duncan. There you go.
There you go. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to thank all my colleagues before me for their important words. And going back to her speech, I really would like to thank Ms. Pettipaw-Taylor. There's a reason she devoted her life to social work. And I'd also like to thank her for her work as our former Minister of Health, and particularly the good work she did on the food guide and her work with thalidomide survivors. And I'll just say one last thanks to her. Thank you for seconding the motion for a standing committee on science and research. It was really important that you were included. as you've been a tireless champion for health science and research. And Mr. Turnbull, thank you again for your always rational argument. We are in a once-in-a-century pandemic, and with huge economic and health impacts, and that's why it was so important to prorogue. But of course, colleagues, we're here to debate why it's important to invite the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth to come to our committee and ultimately to discuss why it was necessary for the government to prorogue to deal with the greatest public health crisis in a century. And as you know, I've been speaking in detail about COVID-19 and its impacts on Canadians. After all, what could be more important than how the people we serve are getting through the pandemic? Are they healthy, safe? Are we doing everything we can to protect their livelihoods? And I think it's important to always remember the lives lost, and remember families and communities are grieving and they're hurting. And I think it's also important to remember our first line healthcare workers who are fighting the virus tirelessly. And as you know, it's Nurses Week, and it's an opportunity to thank them for their work, their life-saving work, their work at the bedside. I know in my own family's case, I was extremely grateful for when they would take my father's arm and listen to his stories. So thank you to all our nurses. And I also like to thank the essential workers who have worked through the pandemic to keep our communities and our country going. And I will make the point that last week, more cases of COVID-19 had been reported globally. This is really important in the previous 2 weeks than during the first 6 months of the pandemic. And we are now seeing a plateauing in the number of COVID-19 cases and deaths, with declines in most regions, including the Americas and Europe, the two worst affected regions. But it's an unacceptably high plateau, with more than 5.4 million reported cases and almost 90,000 deaths last week. But today I'm going to use my time to focus on prorogation and the pandemic, and why we should be taking the important step of bringing forward the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth to hear why it was necessary to prorogue during a once-in-a-century pandemic. We have been at this amendment for weeks. Our colleagues across the way put forward a motion. We came forward with an amendment. Negotiations involve some give and take, and I hope we are going to see more movement in the coming days. As I have said before, I absolutely support having the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth come to this committee to explain why it was necessary to prorogue during the greatest public health crisis in 100 years. So let me start by saying that prorogation is a long-standing feature of Canadian parliamentary government. In fact, by 2010, there had been over 100 prorogations. Let me repeat that. Prorogation is a long-standing feature of our Canadian parliamentary government. There have been many prorogation requests by former governments and prime ministers, and in the early decades of the Canadian Parliament, the practice was to end a session of Parliament by prorogation rather than a lengthy adjournment. In 1982, I believe the standing orders were introduced to establish fixed sessions, which have resulted in approximately 2.1 prorogations for each parliament. And most Canadian federal and provincial governments prorogue at least once between elections. I think it is really important to note that our government was exceptional in not proroguing at all in its first term from 2015 to 2019. Regardless, I think it is important to have the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Diversity and Inclusion in Youth come to answer questions about the prorogation report. Why it was necessary to prorogue during the greatest public health crisis in 100 years. I've been here a while, and I remember very well the 40th Parliament. I had just been elected, and I was so excited to serve the people of Etobicoke North. It's the place where I'm born and raised, and to serve all Canadians. But I didn't get to serve very many weeks in the People's House in that Parliament, because there was the most famous prorogation, perhaps more accurately infamous, in Canadian history in 2008, undertaken by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. In that minority government situation, the three opposition parties publicly agreed to defeat the Conservative government in an upcoming vote of non-confidence. But instead, former Prime Minister Harper went to the Governor General of the day and requested a prorogation. It was granted, and the Conservative government narrowly escaped defeat. Mr. Harper outmaneuvered the opposition's attempt to democratically unseat him and form a coalition government. According to Maclean's magazine, Mr. Harper's, quote, failure to frankly explain why he should be allowed to postpone facing a confidence vote in the House, the bedrock source of a government's democratic legitimacy in the British parliamentary system, seemed evasive. The highest duty of a prime minister is to uphold the Constitution of Canada, which includes the rights and privileges of the House of Commons and the duties owed to the Queen's representative in Canada. While prorogation had been routine, the 2008 prorogation was not. And let me be clear, Mr. Harper never had to write a report explaining why he prorogued. And oddly, in the context of today's discussion, I simply cannot recall any Conservative members who asked him or any other minister to appear at committee to explain his decision to Canadians. We, on the other hand, think that ministers should come talk about the prorogation report, a reporting mechanism our government put in place. And ministers should explain why they think that prorogation was necessary during the greatest public health crisis in a century. The government House Leader has come in front of this committee, and we think the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister and Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth should also come. I think it is important to point out that previous Conservative and Liberal governments have prorogued for much less.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
I'm having a problem with my mute. Yes, Svekio.
Hi, I'm just checking. Ms. Duncan has mentioned very often about the other two ministers, and I'm just wondering if we can get an update from the clerk whether there has been anything happened since the ministers have been asked and if they've responded yet. I know that just a week and a half ago, there was discussion that members were going to see what they could do. I'm just wondering if we've heard anything on their invitations and their RSVPs.
Okay. I can confidently say that the clerk and I update, or he updates me on any communications that we receive. And so the answer would be the same as it was during the last meeting, that invites had gone out initially many months ago now, but there has been no response to those invites. This is a perfect time for me, I guess, since we've already made a small interjection here. I wanted to update you all that the clerk and the team in the room reached out to me just 5 minutes ago. I was just waiting for a good time to make the announcement that we have a similar situation with The interpreters needing to switch over at 2 o'clock, like we had last time. I guess this is due to a shortage of interpreters that we're seeing this, and we haven't seen it in other meetings that we've had necessarily. So at 2 o'clock, they'll need half an hour to switch over if we do want to resume at 2:30. At 2:30, the cleaners would need to come in if we were to allow agriculture to proceed from this room at that point. And then at 3 o'clock, we do have votes with no bells. So I just wanted to inform all of you of that. You don't have to decide immediately right away about what you want to do, but I wanted to put that out there since I just heard from the clerk that this is the situation. But if anyone wants to respond to what I've just announced, you feel free to do so at this point, since we have asked Ms. Duncan, or interrupted Ms. Duncan from her speech. Okay, I guess a little bit before I will have to suspend at 2. I'll let you know that so that the interpreters can switch over. And at that point, before we do suspend at 2, you can let me know how you want to proceed. Okay, Dr. Duncan.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I think it's important to point out that previous Conservative and Liberal governments have prorogued for much less than a once-in-a-century pandemic, and have not even had to explain themselves in a report or otherwise, as our government has done. I would like to talk about former Prime Minister Harper's use of prorogation, which wasn't followed by reports from the governments of the day. The recess for Mr. Harper took Canada into uncharted constitutional territory and created a political vacuum at a time of global economic crisis. And I'd like to quote from the New York Times, quote, Canada's parliamentary opposition reacted with outrage on Thursday after Prime Minister Stephen Harper shut down the legislature until January 26, seeking to forestall a no-confidence vote that he was sure to lose and possibly provoking a constitutional crisis. The opposition fiercely criticized the decision to suspend Parliament, accusing Mr. Harper of undermining the nation's democracy. We have to say to Canadians, is this the kind of government you want? Said Bob Rae, at the time a member of the opposition Liberal Party. Do we want a party in place that is so undemocratic that it will not meet the House of Commons? That sentiment was echoed by constitutional scholars who lamented that the Governor General might have created a mechanism that future prime ministers could use to bypass the legislature when it seemed convenient. This was the first time any parliament members or constitutional scholars here could recall the maneuver being used in the midst of a political crisis and over the objections of Parliament. This really has been a blow to parliamentary democracy in Canada, said Nelson Wiseman, a professor of political science at the University of Toronto. It has lowered the status of the elected parliament and raised the status of the unelected prime minister. Canadians were outraged by former Prime Minister Harper's use of prorogation, with reports noting how thousands took to the streets to protest. Thousands of people attended rallies in towns and cities across Canada to speak out against Prime Minister Stephen Harper's decision to suspend Parliament. More than 60 rallies were planned across Canada. Thousands of protesters gathered at Yonge Dundas Square in Toronto to protest the suspension of Parliament. Some took the demonstration onto the street, chanting and waving placards as they moved down Yonge Street. It's about the masses and their voices being heard, Sonia Stanger, 18, said. You know, representation of the masses, and that's not what's happening right now. Now, Mr. Turnbull's amendment is just meant to bring more focus, to bring the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth to the motion of Ms. Vecchio and allow us to move on to something substantive. But again, let's look at reactions to prorogation. I would like to quote briefly from another story. Quote, in a display that was anything but apathetic, thousands of Canadians of varying political stripes clogged city streets across Canada, demanding Prime Minister Stephen Harper reopen Parliament and get back to work. Hordes of protesters crammed Toronto's downtown square, holding signs denouncing the Prime Minister's decision to suspend Parliament. More than 3,000 people closed down a busy section of Yonge Street to sing, march, and chant. A more subdued Jason Young, 36, stood quietly beside the chanting protesters. He said he was not a partisan person, but had begun to resent Mr. Harper's interpretation of democracy. I hope there are a lot of people who would identify themselves as conservatives here today, because all Canadians should be concerned about this, he said. Another small group had their own dramatic interpretation of the suspension of Parliament. Several pallbearers dressed in black walked behind a piper and carried a coffin with poster of Parliament inside, hoisting a sign that read, "Democracy is dead." I came to Canada to escape dictatorship, said Masood Hassan, 66, an immigrant from Pakistan who was attending his first public rally. The point is, thousands of Canadians protested prorogued Parliament. It was a crisis that shook the nation. There was no accountability, no need to explain to Canadians why the prorogation was necessary. And again, in the words of Maclean's, Mr. Harper's failure to frankly explain why he should be allowed to postpone facing a confidence vote in the House seemed evasive. Again, in stark contrast.
A point of order, if I might, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Blakey.
We're now about half an hour past when I had hoped that we might come to a vote on the amendment, and I wanted to mark the occasion by drawing members' attention to the House of Commons procedure and practice in respect of amendments at committee, and note that only one amendment can be considered by committee at one time. In other words, if there is going to be some other kind of solution, if Mr. Turnbull's amendment is not the way forward, and I think after some 30 or 40 hours, it's fair to conclude in an evidence-based way that his proposal is not the way forward, then in order for there to be any point or purpose to opposition members of the committee convening a meeting between now and the committee's next meeting to talk about what another proposal might be, we would have to clear the air on this one. So if we're going to continue to waste time speaking to an amendment that's dead in the water, and we can't have a vote at least to decide that, then I don't see any point in me and my colleagues on the opposition taking time to work towards a solution to bring till Thursday, will Liberals reserve the right to bullheadedly insist on a failed proposal. So either we're working on something new, or this moment at the committee where we might move forward is over. And if we continue talking about this amendment without a vote for the next half hour or 2 hours, I'm telling you, the moment's over. So if the Liberals want a 5-minute suspension so they can get it together and talk about whether they're serious about having this committee move on to more important business, so be it. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like somehow this is a constructive committee working towards a solution when I got people yammering in my ear about a failed proposal. We're either trying to move on or we aren't. So what's it going to be, and how are we going to decide that?
Okay. Does anyone want to respond to that proposal, or should I? Okay, Ms. Petty-Pat-Taylor.
Madam Chair, I really would like to take Mr. Blakey's point in taking a 5-minute break, and perhaps that our Liberal colleagues can just chat about this. I don't think it's a bad idea to be able to do that. So if my colleagues agree, I would really like to take a few minutes and be able to chat with my colleagues.
Ms. Vecchio?
Oh, sorry, I was thinking you're asking for 5 minutes to speak to your colleagues. That's what you're asking for?
For Mr. Blakey's recommendation or suggestion,
okay.
I just wanted to take him up on that.
Yeah, so I think at the will of the committee, I'm 100% where Daniel's from. So I mean, let's just get our stuff together. I totally understand. So it's truly up to the will of the committee, but thank you very much, Daniel, for bringing that forward.
Okay, so we will suspend for 5 minutes and I will see you back. order. We were on, I did also want to let you know that the clerk informed me while we were on our suspension that there was a slight error made in terms of timing of the interpreters having to switch. They said that they can go until 2:30 before they need to switch. So originally I had announced them switching at 2. So it's 2:30, and that's the same time the room would need to be switched over for the Agriculture Committee as well. So I expect to be suspending at 2:30 or sooner if there's some kind of resolution to today's meeting. So I will give the floor back to Dr. Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our colleagues. We've discussed the issue and what we're asking for, and I'm sure people can absolutely appreciate this, is we need to see something in writing, and we look forward to seeing that. And that's just good negotiation on all sides. You always want to see something in writing. So I thank my colleagues, and I will continue. I was talking about the 2008 prorogation. It was the crisis that shook the nation. There was no accountability and no need to explain to Canadians why.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I just want to ensure, so we had that 5-minute break and the decision was that you want something in writing. So if I just want to ask for clarification before they continue, there was the request for something in writing. Can I ask what we're going to get in turn? Is we're going to get you guys to stop filibustering? Is that what comes in turn? Like I'm listening to this, the negotiations, and if we're going to negotiate, Daniel has said, what are the plans? You guys have said, we want something in writing. So until then, so please share with me. This is what's holding you up is something from us in writing for us to figure out how to get you guys to stop talking on this filibuster. I just want to ensure we're all on the same page here because, like I said, this morning, I really thought there was good faith this morning. I'll be honest. I recognize that we're in a political theater and I get that. But I mean, I can tell you that in good conscience, I have been trying, and I do believe many others have been trying to find a true right to negotiation. But let's not continue to filibuster. Why don't we just talk this out rather than listening to this garble-goop that we've listened to? It is important information. But if I chose to read these reports that Ryan read to me today, I could have chosen to read those reports. But instead, I've listened to them. I prefer to talk to about what procedures and House Affairs is supposed to be doing and how we're actually going to get to a vote and how we're going to actually get our report done. And instead, it's saying, okay, so if it's funny, if the opposition decides to sit on their hands, until Parliament is adjourned, we will be doing this. Is this what I understand? I just want to see, is there going to be no closure? Is that the plan?
If anyone wants to respond, I guess it can be really any of the members. If
Respond.
Dr. Duncan, did you say you? And then Mr. Luzon also put his hand up as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And friends, and I do consider all of us friends, colleagues. I think we started out in a good way today. There seemed to be actual dialogue back and forth, and it would be nice to be able to get back to this. I think we all would like to get back to this. It's unfortunate that we've hit a stumbling block. I think everyone was hoping that if we took a suspension, or I know on our side, we were hoping if we suspended for a half an hour or so today, that conversations could happen that needed to. I think it's fair to ask for, is it possible to see something in writing? I just think that's a fair and decent way to go forward. And I come back to this committee has done good work together. And Daniel, you said earlier, yes, there's been disagreements and there's always going to be, but that work we did on if there had to be an election during a pandemic, it was good work. It was actually good work. And we put Canadians, their health and safety, and the health and safety of everyone. We made that paramount. I know my colleague, Monsieur Lauzon, would like to comment. Thank you.
Mr. Lauzon?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madame Vecchio, for your comments. They're very relevant, actually. So what we're going to decide on together, in a committee, there's two sides. I mean, there's various parties, but it also, you have to keep in mind that we have responsibilities as a government. And it's not the end of the world in a negotiation if one asks for a written proposition so that we have something that's concrete on the table. It's part of negotiating. And, today we met to debate on the amendment that was brought forward by Mr. Turnbull, but we must keep debating on that amendment. If you look at that amendment, we've accepted to have the Deputy Prime Minister appear and represent the government. And I know that's the big dilemma. That's the dilemma, but the difference between what you're asking and what we're asking, and that's why we're debating. We're still debating, and as I said last week, we firmly believe that the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister will be here, that will not justify the prorogation. And as Dr. Duncan said, and is trying to tell you, she's trying to show you why we have enough work before us to go ahead with C19, for example, and other very important questions and files. That is why we're asking for a concrete written proposition so that we can, compare what your demands are and what we are proposing. That's why we're going to keep debating on Mr. Turnbull's amendment as long as necessary. It's very relevant for us to keep debating and wanting to keep debating. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Blakey.
Be perfectly honest. I mean, it's hard for me to get beyond two possible interpretations of what's happening here. So either by insisting on the idea that they want a written proposal, which is something that we've agreed to as an opposition, we're already trying to negotiate some time in the next 48 hours for us to meet the government's demand that we would propose something in writing. So either the government is being deliberately misleading about the fact that we're somehow denying that we would make an effort to put something in writing, which would be unfortunate, or they don't realize how toxic what they're doing is right now. Because what we've said is that we will, as an act of good faith, meet to discuss in the very way that members on the government side have asked us to do. And we're already undertaking to do that by making those arrangements through our office even as we speak, okay? So we've committed to that. As a reciprocal sign of good faith, we ask that the government not even itself recognize that this proposal towards a compromise that Mr. Turnbull put forward and that we've been debating for a very long time is dead in the water. We don't ask that they say it's a bad idea. We just ask that they allow us to have a vote on it so that when we come back for the following meeting, the slate is clear. They give up nothing in terms of whatever it is they're doing, whether they're protecting the Prime Minister from appearing in committee. I hope not, because I think he belongs here properly in a study of prorogation, and we can disagree about that. whether it's protecting the government more widely on questions of the We Charity scandal, whatever it is that they've been doing here, and they've been doing it for a long time, they give up nothing by having a vote on the amendment, because we'll suspend the meeting and we'll come back and we'll still be on the main motion. They don't surrender their own right to move another amendment, or if a Conservative or Bloc or New Democrat move an amendment on Thursday, they haven't given up their right to move a sub-amendment to that. So there are all sorts of possible ways to proceed. What we're asking for is a minimum show of good faith in a recognition that this particular proposal in Mr. Turnbull's amendment isn't going to be the one that gets us beyond a compromise. So we've already done the good faith thing. We've already undertaken as 3 different political parties on the opposing bench to get together in the next 48 hours and to try our best to produce something in writing that the government folks can look at. And when we ask for a small gesture of good faith, the answer we get after you've had some time off the record to talk about it is, well, the word that I have for that I would use on a job site is not appropriate in a parliamentary context. But I'll tell you, the message is received. So I think if we want to get to a point where we can start with a clean slate on Thursday and have the best possible proposal that 3 different political parties can bring together jointly, it's important to decide the issue on the amendment today. And if we can't get that minimum act of good faith, I think it's pretty presumptuous of the government to say, well, we want something in writing and we want this and we want that. Fine, if we're working in good faith towards a solution. All we're asking is for what I think is a pretty bare minimum sign of good faith from the government side that we would at least dispense with this amendment, and then we'll get to the work of proposing something new. But the government wants to have its cake and eat it too. They want to keep their own proposal, which has had more than its fair share of time at this committee by now. You want to talk about how much time we're given to different solutions? Mr. Turnbull's amendment has been on the table for weeks. We've debated it, you can call it a debate, for hours and hours and hours. All we're asking is that we put that one away with a vote. Who knows, maybe it'll go the government's way. Not likely, but who knows? We can't know until we have the vote. We're just asking to have the vote on it so that we can start talking about a new potential solution on Thursday. That's it. And I don't think you're going to find, I'm going to find it hard to muster the goodwill to talk earnestly about a solution that we could propose to the government if they can't get it together to at least allow us to have the vote on an amendment after tens of hours of debate on it. So I really think this is poisoning the well. I hope it's only happening because people on the government side don't realize what they're doing. And perhaps if they take another moment to reflect, they will realize that they are making it impossible to come to a solution if they carry on in this vein and change their mind. And otherwise, I will be forced to accept the other interpretation, which is that this is deliberate and that they would rather keep pissing away the time of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, as we have for a long time. But then that's on them. That's on them. Because what's being asked here is not a big political loss. It doesn't jeopardize the Prime Minister. It doesn't bring him to this committee. It just clears the air for Thursday so that the opposition parties can do in good faith what they were asked to do by the government and bring forward a proposal, which the government will be at liberty to accept or not as it sees fit. But at least then we could spend our time debating something new. We're not going to get there if this amendment is still on the table at the end of our meeting time today.
On this point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Blakey, for your comment. Il y a 2 choses que je retiens dans qu'est-ce que vous venez.
2 things I'd like to tell you. You mentioned many times, Mr. Blakey, the fact that this amendment isn't valid anymore and it died in a way. But Ryan's motion is not finished. Nothing leads us to believe today that this motion isn't valid. That's what you're telling us. I respect your opinion, but you must also respect the government's position, whether we're in a minority or a majority government. the government wants to go ahead with this study, but we do not accept the fact that you want the Prime Minister to appear. That's what we're debating on currently. The second thing I'd like to speak on, following your comments, I'd like to talk about the technical aspect of negotiating. What we're asking of you is not impossible. You know, I wasn't here for the first 50 minutes. You said that the debate was pretty healthy. You said that we could reach a consensus thanks to a new motion or a new proposition that the opposition could table on Thursday. However, it's not the end of the day, the end of the world, sorry, that we're asking an opportunity to keep conversing and talking. Or maybe using this new proposition and debating on it in this committee. But today, what's extremely valid and relevant for us is Mr. Turnbull's amendment. And I would say it is wrong to say that we have to move on. That's your opinion. But that's not what we said during our conversation. What we said was that we were ready to listen to other proposals. I did hear the conversation this morning, and many recommendations were made. Perhaps they could be written down on paper. That's not the end of the world. And then we'll carry on with talks on Thursday, and we'll see what's happening then. But Dr. Duncan today has the floor. And with all due respect, I think we should allow her to tell us why we should go ahead with Mr. Turnbull's amendment.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais me permettre de prendre quelques minutes aussi sur ce point d'ordre-là. Mais je vous ai suivi sur...
Thank you very much. I was waiting to take my turn. You didn't see me this morning, but I saw you on POV, because when something happens at PROC, I checked in because I figured, my goodness, for 2 months, nothing much is happening. So I'd like to tune in and see what's happening. So what I was seeing when I tuned in gave me hope that we could perhaps lead to something constructive and get out of the impasse that we're caught in. And then the filibuster resumed, and I listened a little more distractedly. And then at 1 p.m., I connected when Alain wasn't available anymore. But if I hadn't been there this morning, all I would have heard is what I've been hearing since 1 p.m. And it gives me the impression that not only are we no longer at the same point, we've actually regressed in our conversation. What I'm hearing is, if I don't take into consideration what was positive this morning, the Liberals are asking us to come up with a written motion simply for the purpose of getting us to come up with a written motion. But they're saying, well, we might not even look at it because the only thing that we're interested in is this very moment that we're continuing to filibuster about. So unless we have some form of openness and concrete proposals were made, unless we get some concrete openness, I take this more as an insult, the fact that you're asking us for something in writing. I mean, if the wish is, and I hope that this is the case, that everybody on the committee wants to arrive at something constructive, it's going to take a little bit more than the simple fact of asking us for something in writing. It's going to need a token of good faith on the part of the Liberals also, because all I've been seeing since 1 p.m. is regression with respect to the simple filibuster that we've been in for so long. That's what I wanted to add in. I was somebody who saw and didn't see all of this morning's discussions.
Thank you, Madame Normandin. Ms. Vecchio.
And on the same point of order, thank you very much, Christine, for noting, and thank you very much, Daniel. I really do appreciate it. And Stefan, I really do appreciate your words. I do know that you've been in and out of committee, but you have done this as well. I think as we are all getting here, it's where are our timelines? This morning, the reason this conversation started is because we know that we have an important piece of legislation that got rushed through Parliament just the other day, to be honest, got rushed through Parliament and now will be on our doorsteps tomorrow because we'll be voting on it today. So I look at the fact that we know this is coming. So today was the plan. What are we going to be doing? Because as of Thursday, we now have another piece that is being added to our agenda that we need to start looking forward on. Are we going to continue with C19? Are we going to be going to do our estimates? What are we going to be doing? And I just see that this last 40 hours has truly been on that. And honestly, I think I can tell you my intentions was trying to open up a pathway so that we could look at C19. That is something that I know is a lot of pressure to look at C19. So I'm asking for the government to come up with a way so that we can look at C19, because all that's happened today is all of the good faith bargaining that was done this morning is going to get lost, because when we come back on Thursday, the question is going to be, here is your written amendment. And then do we get told not good enough, so we're going to continue? And maybe those are some of the things. It's because the unknown. It's we don't know if our amendment's not good enough. That means no, we're going to continue with Ryan's, or no, we'll accept this amendment, but we'll continue to filibuster. There's so many unknowns here, and I think logically we need to look at what are the priorities of this committee. We need to get to Bill C19. If we have the opportunity to look at estimates, we should be looking at estimates. But ultimately, listening to these speeches on this amendment just to waste time. When I really appreciate Stefan and his comments, but when the majority have outright spoken and said in this committee they will not be supporting it, you are beating a dead horse. And every person in this committee room today knows that. This is a dead horse, and that's extremely unfortunate. Let's get back to doing some work. Daniel has already indicated that we are working on this, and we really are. We really are working on this. I would really like to see some movement from our Liberal members rather than just reading prorogation speeches into the record Tuesdays and Thursdays every week for the last 3 months. Thank you.
Ms. Petty-Pat-Taylor.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for their candid comments today, and we're being honest, and we should have been doing this probably several weeks ago. I do have to say, though, that I really believe that we all came into this conversation this morning in good faith. Karen, you came forward and said, what's the plan for today? We need to come to a compromise. We need to get somewheres. We need to get to a vote. So to say that nothing was brought forward, I think is a little bit unfair, because when that was brought forward, then from there we spoke about, well, you know what, maybe would a written response suffice? And then from there was a bit of conversation about that. And then from there, the issue about perhaps the opposition members coming up with exactly what they're looking for was discussed as well. But I guess we have to make it very clear. We had a discussion at the beginning of the meeting, and I think it was a good discussion, a robust discussion, and an honest discussion. But let's be frank, there was never a decision that was made, and we just kind of continued on with the course of business. So I guess I just need to be clear. I know for myself, and I know many of my colleagues, are in this, we want to negotiate in good faith. We want to find a path forward here. And to your point, we have a lot of really important work that is waiting for us, But to say that there was a decision that had been made by the end of the meeting, no decision had been made. We talked about it, we discussed it, but we didn't come up with a consensus. So I just feel compelled that I have to say that. And at the end of the day, I guess I'm just like, what is to come up with something on paper and then from there to vote on it next week? I don't know really what is the issue with this short delay in order to allow us to really properly reflect on what's been brought forward. I just don't understand why that is so difficult. And maybe I'm missing something, but I just felt that I had to share that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, anything on the same point of order?
I'm just not sure what she's referring to. The delay on what specifically?
I guess the point being that you want the vote to be absolutely today. I don't know why is it has to be today before the end of the meeting, as opposed to why can't it be next meeting once that the three opposition committee or groups get together and decide exactly what it is that you want. I guess that's it.
Okay, so I guess what I'm looking for is perhaps you guys can give us an agenda or a plan on what you see us doing. Tomorrow we will meeting because we all are on board to meet, because every single member of the opposition wants to get this over with as well. We will be having a meeting. We will be providing some intel. Now what happens? We've provided you intel, and then what is the Liberal government going to do now in committee? And that is my greatest concern, is we are working in good faith as well. And absolutely, and I've said now 3 times, C-19 is at our doorsteps as of Monday. You and I both know how long it takes to get legislation through. It will come to here, then it goes back to the House, then it goes to the Senate. We know, let's not kid ourselves. We are probably going to be going to the polls in October of 2021. We have 5 full sitting weeks after next week. So that means that our piece of legislation needs to get done in committee with the witnesses, needs to go back to the House, needs to go to the Senate. The more that this is delayed, the more we won't have our pandemic the legislation in case of a pandemic election in place. And I would actually say it has a lot to do with this continuation of the filibuster. I think that we would be able to probably be able to get to a bill if we had good faith also in the Liberal members, knowing that we could get both things done. Right now, we have either or. We can either get the report done or we can get C-19 done. We need to get both done. And so we need to find a way of doing that. And those are some of my concerns. I perhaps it's just because I really believe in saying, what is our target? Our target is that we have legislation passed and ready, because I do not want to see a single voter have a problem when they go to the polls during a pandemic election if this gets called. We need to ensure that voters are safe, just as Dr. Duncan had illustrated in her comments throughout that period of time. So the option is, we can either get the work done to ensure that Canadians are going to be able to vote by ensuring that the committee is actually doing their job, and stop the filibustering and let's get our work done. So I guess for me, it's where I'd like to see all of us work together and say, these are the things we're going to get done. We know that we have a deadline. How are we going to get both the report done as done, or as with the witnesses as requested, and how are we going to get Bill C-19 back to the House of Commons for the 3rd reading?
I'm happy to add to that point, Madam Chair, if I could be permitted. I mean, I think the issue here is this. We're trying to conduce towards some kind of solution. We clearly don't agree on everything. I mean, if you look at the position of the Conservative Party and the Bloc on the time allocation vote, for instance, on C-19 yesterday, it was different than the NDP vote. We've been willing to work with the government to try and get it to committee, because that's something we think is really important to get underway, right? So the government has casually asked 3 different political parties with 3 different views, including on some of the business that's either before or is going to come before this committee. That's a fair bit of work. There's no guarantee of success. It's something that we're prepared to do if the government is open to new solutions. But they make that request, and then they come back to the table and say, our preferred solution is our solution. It's the one on the table. Monsieur Lezon disputes the idea that this proposal is dead in the water. That's fine. There's a way to decide that. There's a way to figure that out. It's to have a vote. That's how you figure out what's got majority support or not. So if the idea is to find some kind of consensus on a path forward, I can tell you it ain't a consensus. So it's going to get decided on a majority basis. The only way to know if it has majority support or not is to have a vote. So what we're asking for, we've signaled a willingness to reassess, to look at things, to do that in a way that crosses party lines, which is not always an easy thing to navigate, particularly when there may be differences of opinion on C-19 when it comes to committee, and there are different political agendas at play in respect of that bill and the wider question. But that's not worth doing if the government isn't open to another solution. And what you're signaling by insisting on the amendment that we've been debating for months is that you're not really open to it, unless it's something you like behind closed doors. So what you want is a written statement jointly by 3 different political parties with very different interests to be considered behind closed doors, and then you'll decide whether you like it or not, and it may never grace the committee floor. I'm sorry. but that's not coming at a negotiation as equals. So it is not going to succeed because I think it's a waste of my time to try and work with two other political parties to come up with a proposal that might satisfy a third and not even have the space at the committee table to deal with it because we can't get a vote to resolve a question that's been open for months. So if the government isn't prepared to offer a vote on its own amendment as a sign of good faith towards getting towards some kind of compromise, it ain't worth doing the work on our side. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the time. So if the government wants to show us on the opposition side that it's worth our time to do the hard work that we'll have to do between ourselves to hammer out some kind of common proposal forward, then they need to show that they're willing to move on from this amendment one way or another. Monsieur Lauzon says, maybe it's not dead in the water. I say, let's find out. The way to do that is to have the vote. If the government would at least allow the committee to decide the question, then we would know that it's worth doing the work to find another alternative. Because what we're hearing right now, after all of this, after the conversation earlier this morning, after the 5-minute recess, is that the government's preference is to continue to talk this out for as long as they possibly can without giving an inch, unless the three opposition parties together pitch something behind closed doors that they happen to like. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not a real negotiation. That's not a sign of good faith. And I'm not somebody's puppet that's going to play along like a moron unless I actually get a sign from the other side that it's worth my time. I got other things to work on, frankly. I got people I'm trying to get back to in my constituency. I've got meetings that I would like to hold. I'm trying to fit that all in. Well, I sit on 3 different committees, some of which are going quite a bit better than this one, I might add. So I'm not going to invest the time to try and get the government out of its own problem if they can't even allow us just to have a vote on the very proposal that they put forward. And it's not like we haven't given it a lot of time. So how much more time do they think, in the context of today's conversation, it's going to take before anyone on the opposition side decides it would be a good idea to back this motion? I think we're ready for the vote, Madam Chair. So as a sign, a minimal sign of good faith, let's have that vote, and then we can be solutions oriented. But as long as the government is going to try and have its cake and eat it too on this committee, that is not going to be a way forward, I guarantee it. So what are we doing here? Are we working on a path forward, or are we digging in? Because I can dig in with the best of them, and I'm pretty tempted right now. So are we going to let this moment pass us by, or are we going to get dug in?
Sorry, did you, Dr. Duncan? Emmanuel, are you also raising your hand, or you were just, okay, sorry. Dr. Duncan, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. I'm going to try and bring us back to this morning. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor came in good faith. I know Ms. Vecchio is coming in good faith. And I really feel our colleagues are trying, all of us, to find a way through this. I don't think the language helps at the moment. I do think we need to lower, to try and bring us together and to come back and find that feeling of that there is a way through. And Mr. Blakey, Daniel, I hear what you're saying. I think that lines have been drawn. And I think we really need to get back to what we felt this morning and seeing what's possible. And I'm hearing from, if I can, Karen and Daniel, that people are, I'm Kirsty, that people are meeting and we're trying to see if we can move past this. I look across the screen, I see my colleagues. I see my friends. You know, some of you I've known a very long time. And I'm just wondering if we can lower the temperature and see if we can talk this through and see if we can get a proposal that all can agree to. Dear colleagues, dear friends.
Manuela? Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I know that Mr. Blakey is frustrated with what's going on. I understand. I don't think, coming up and working with other parties is ever a waste of time. And I think that, it's what all parliamentarians should strive to do, to work together for the best outcome for Canadians. And so, working alongside our colleagues from other parties is sometimes a way forward and a way to get the job done in a positive way and benefits everybody. So, the amount of time that we've spent debating the amendment that's on the floor, and previously, I mean, I wasn't here during that time, but previously the proposal by Ms. Vecchio, the motion, the original motion, I think, it's a normal request to see something in writing, and I don't think it would take up a lot of time. I think it's something you guys could probably do while we're taking part in this debate. I don't see a lot of additional time being had, especially if you guys claim to be on the same page regardless. So if that is the case, I don't see how bringing forward a potential solution next week would be problematic. So I just wanted to chime in and say that. Okay, I think we've exhausted the speakers on that point as far as I'm aware. Okay, Mr. Luzon.
Wait, sorry, I just want to add something on this from the Dr. Duncan comment. Je veux parler à tout le comité, mais effectivement, plus précisément à Monsieur.
I'm talking to the whole committee, but also especially to Mr. Blakey. I'm not in politics to waste my time. I know we have better things to do. Often in politics, we try and do our best. And what we're doing here in this committee is something that others have done before, your party, the Conservative Party. And we're not always doing what we want to do. So I understand your frustration. I understand that you want to go ahead. And we have C19 at our door. And as Dr. Duncan did, in spite of all the frustrations, in spite of all we live in committees, we know that there is pressure, but we have a good opportunity to use our energy on C19, that is at our doorstep. So I think that C19 will give us an opportunity to probably stop arguing about what we're arguing right now.
Ask for a written proposal that I wouldn't think it was worth it. It's if you insist on not having a vote on the amendment and clearing the deck so that a new proposal could be put forward on Thursday. It's not the fact of asking for a written proposal that I find objectionable. It's the fact that you won't let us have a vote on the proposal that's been on the table for months to decide that question and clear the air so that we can move on to a new solution. That's what I find objectionable. I'm quite happy to work with the other parties to put something in writing. Done that many times in this parliament. I've sometimes done it with other opposition parties. I've sometimes worked with your government. In fact, before the pandemic struck, I worked with with Chrystia Freeland in order to amend the trade policy for the country. That was a process that involved lots of things in writing between parties. I'm very happy to do that kind of work. What I want to know is whether there's good faith on the other side, and I want more than words. We've had a lot of words for the last month. What I want is an action a signal that there's good faith. And that signal is letting there be a vote to let the committee pronounce on the amendment that's on the floor. That would be a sign of good faith that would show me that that work with the other parties is worth it. And it's not just the government making busy work for their political opponents while reserving the right to tell us to get lost if they don't like the outcome. That's what I'm talking about. So I just want to be clear so that you're responding to the right thing.
I just want to finish on that. Okay, Madam Chair. I understand you, Mr. Blakey, but you know, it goes on both sides. That's what they call negotiation, and that's what we're doing right now. And it is so important for us to go forward for different issue like C19. Aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment ce que vous nous apportez. En fait, c'est ce qu'on veut depuis toujours.
Today, what you're bringing is what we've always wanted, which is to get to a solution. But, you know, asking for something in writing for Thursday would be the best thing to be able to get there. Now, maybe you'll come up with something that's going to be a good solution and that we'll simply say, okay, let's vote on it, and we'll vote, and there'll be a new motion, and we'll move forward with the end of this study. You know, you have to be honest with all of this. Let's be honest. Today, with the pandemic, with C19, with all of the files underway, we ought really to be focusing on the post-pandemic, even if we're still in the pandemic. You know this, and everybody knows this. But we know that it's no longer current. You know, Madam Chair, Mr. Blakey knows, everybody knows, it's no longer current today to talk about proroguing and to be continuing. We should just finish with this matter. That's our opinion. It's not dead in the water otherwise. And we absolutely want to move forward, just as you do, as everybody else on the committee does. We want to move on to something else. But what's important today is that there were negotiations, there was progress, as Dr. Duncan said, there was good exchange. It was a good conversation. It's not that, you know, we don't want to go backwards. We don't want to go further back than we were. We did move forward today, like it or not. We did move forward today because we opened conversation towards solutions, group negotiations that take years to do between parties and the government. And we're trying to negotiate quickly over an amendment or over the original motion by Ms. Vecchio. And we don't agree. That's what negotiation is all about, like it or not. When you don't agree on something, you continue to negotiate and you continue to debate. What we chose to do, we're only just prevailing of our own rights. We have the right to debate an amendment. And we know that you're opposed to this amendment. But it's not correct to say, well, to know this, you have to vote to be able to know the result. We already know what the result is. What we want is to make the point, why does the Prime Minister not have to come here and speak to the committee after the prorogation decision? That's the main idea of this, that it's not about prorogation. It's about the points that you're trying to link up with We Charity and the Prime Minister. Our idea will not change. We're not going to change our mind. So if you write something down for Thursday, I think it's perfectly justified to demonstrate our collaboration, contrary to what you're saying.
And we want to get work done. So let's do it together like a team. Merci.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I guess I'd like to be clear on something, Madam Chair. Like the government is willing to jeopardize trying to move forward on this for the right to continue to filibuster on their amendment, as opposed to the right to filibuster on the main motion, which from a practical point of view has no difference that I can identify. I'm going to be very happy if somebody on the Liberal government could provide a compelling explanation as to why it matters from the point of view of not hearing more about We Charity and not hearing from the Prime Minister Committee, which is very clear, it's not something they want, why it matters whether they filibuster on the amendment or whether they filibuster on the main motion. Because what's being asked is for us, what I think is a small act of good faith to dispense with the amendment to clear the way towards some other possible solution. But that's not, they're not willing to do that. So there's got to be a reason why it matters that they filibuster on the amendment as opposed to the main motion. Now, I can't think of one myself. I don't see it. We're not asking them to give up any kind of material advantage. We're asking for a symbol of openness towards a proposal that isn't the amendment that we've been debating now for, I couldn't tell you how many hours. It's a lot. It's more than I've debated just about any other motion in my parliamentary life so far. It's a lot. So I don't know what rides on that, except for me, I know what rides on that. I know that that's an important symbol of the government's actual openness to consider a new way forward. So presumably there's a good reason why they're not willing to offer that up. Mr. Lauzon likes to say it's a negotiation. Yeah, it is. So what we're saying is, as an act of good faith, we're willing to convene a meeting between 3 different political parties to try and come up with a written proposal by Thursday that the government may find pleasing or may not. And in exchange, we're asking that they be willing to filibuster on the main motion instead of the amendment. And if they're not prepared to do something, even that insignificant from a practical point of view, as a sign of good faith, then the good faith's not there. Because the increment that you would need to measure that minuscule amount of good faith is one that is beyond my capacity. I don't have a tool to measure things that small, Madam Chair. So that's what's at issue. I just want everybody to understand that before we leave here today. Because if there isn't a written proposal for Thursday, while the amendment stands on the committee table, I want everybody who might be listening to understand why. And it's because we couldn't get a basic minimum act of good faith from the government side, who apparently is more interested in filibustering on an amendment than getting towards a solution, in particular when we've got important items coming. I'm particularly concerned about C19. I mean, there's lots of things we could talk about. We have, over the last 30 or 40 hours, talked about many things that we might talk about if we weren't talking about this. But C19 clearly is very important. I voted with other New Democrats in order to expedite its passage to committee. I've heard government members say they think it's very important that it get considered at committee. We're trying to clear a path. There is no path without dispensing with this amendment. So, whether it's that this amendment passes, Monsieur Lauzon himself has said there's no question, even in his mind, whether it would pass or not. If this amendment isn't going to pass, then it's got to be some other kind of amendment, right? I mean, if this isn't the amendment, it's got to be another one or something else, like voting down the motion, having another proposal, whatever. But if this ain't going to be it, and Monsieur Lauzon just said as much, that he knows it's not going to pass, which is why he's avoiding the vote, then in order to move forward, we got to get on to something else. We can only do that once we clear the table of the unsuccessful proposal that's there. That's not a knock on Mr. Turnbull. It wasn't for him to come up with the solution ex nihilo out of his own mind and slap something down on the table that was going to suddenly wow everybody. That's not what we're doing here. That's why the 3 other opposition parties are going to meet. And I bet the first idea that gets uttered in tomorrow's meeting, if it happens, isn't going to be the one that gets accepted, because that's not the way things work. What I can't fathom is why the Liberals on this committee won't allow us to move on into a space where people can propose other solutions. That's what's happening here. And I just want that to be crystal clear on the record before whatever's going to happen next happens.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Okay, so seeing the time, I'm going to suspend until the next meeting. So we are now suspended. Thank you.